A very warm welcome to everyone in joining today's panel discussion on Indian economy and climate change issues in the way forward, jointly organized by Reserve Bank of India and Madras Institute of Development Studies. It's time, we'll honor the guest with a bouquet. So I'd request Professor L. Venkatachalam, our officiating director, to present the flowers to our chairperson, Sri N. Gopalaswamy, IAS retired. Now I request Dr. Kripa Ananspur to present the flowers to Mrs. Uma Shankar, Chief General Manager, Reserve Bank of India. I invite a chairperson to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning to all of you. Let me begin by paying homage to our founder, Professor Dr. Adiseshiah, and his wife, Elizabeth, whose munificence has been responsible for setting up of MIDS. Sri S.M.N. Swami, Madam Uma Shankar, Professor Venkatachalam, Faculty of MIDS, students and friends. It's indeed my pleasure in being with you on this inaugural of the climate change issues and way forward conference organized by MIDS along with RBI. We've been talking about climate change for a long number of years. Only recently we have just a few days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has come out with this last report. But of course, it's a compilation of their recommendations and findings of the previous reports. It's indeed an interesting thing. Colonialism still prevails. When I say this, you may be wondering what exactly I'm driving at. Okay. The developed countries developed on the back of the poor of the exploited countries. And today, when the world is paying a price, those who have exploited and made good are refusing to part with funds for ensuring that the climate change does not. Ultimately, the climate changes which come will affect the poor countries much more than the rich countries. But that is the unequal world we have to live with, and there is no gainsaying that. But the fact of the matter remains that each country has to develop its own methodologies to meet with it, though of course in India we have kept 2070 as a target date, which is today, it seems quite a big calling. I mean, it seems to be a very tough task indeed. And as per some reports, even with the best of efforts, as of now, whatever is in position, cannot prevent 2.5 to 3.2 degree increase in the general temperatures till the year 2100, which means that if we are aiming at something much better in 2070, the effort has to be far, far more rigorous. So in that context, today's meeting becomes very important, that we consider ways and means by which India can meet the challenge, especially on the financial side. But along with it, I am also making a suggestion here. Let me take the chance to make the suggestion that non-financial steps also need to be equally emphasized and important. Small things, but add up to a lot of good. You keep seeing many reports about the way waste is converted into useful material on various different. Recently you saw the Prime Minister wearing a jacket which is manufactured in Karur out of PET bottles. Okay. So each of those issues becomes important because ultimately, even if you pump in the finances required, until the general public accepts it and practices certain things which need to be practiced for ensuring a less carbon footprint, the effort will not be successful. Such simple things as, I'm sorry to take a little more time on the on this. I went to Bombay for a conference a week ago, and they had booked me in a hotel. When I entered the hotel room, I was freezing almost to death. Okay. So I went to the front desk and asked them, saying that why is it this is being done? After all, I went at 7 o'clock in the evening and the room was freezing. Okay, which means that the entire day the AC must have been on in that room. There is a Gujarati, we refer to this as somebody else's money. Kona Bapni Diwali means that who's paying for it. Okay. So I told them, saying that if you do, there are about 200 rooms. Imagine that. What an amount of electricity was wasted. If even half the number of rooms people occupied after 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and throughout the day for 8 to 10 hours the ACs had been running. So do we not need to look at policies which prevent such misuse? Of course, the front desk very dutifully answered me, saying that no sir, the cleaning staff would have kept it on, even though our instructions are not to do that. Okay. So the policy issues need to be looked at from various angles in order to ensure that the policy is actually carried out at the ground level. Can there be different rates for electricity consumed beyond a point from many of these institutions? These are the issues which also need to be looked at. And let me quote one small example of how effective policy can be. This is in UK in 1981. We just landed in UK, and 1 week later, there was an announcement that the Greater London Corporation was very concerned about congestion and because of that pollution in the central district of London. 15 days later, they came out with the policy. The policy was parking rates in central London and in the immediate vicinity, which was marked as Zone 2. Zone 1 was central London. Zone 2 was adjoining that for a kilometer, 2 kilometers, and the rest of it was Zone 3. Zone 1, the parking rates were made 4 times higher. And Zone 2, the parking rates were double. And Zone 3, parking rates remained the same. That day, in my institute where I was doing a course, the faculty was furiously calculating what it will take them if they bring the car and then park. Almost all of them decided that they will use the public transport. But there is one interesting thing. The cost of the public transport fares were halved. So see the complementarity of the policy. On one side, you increase the parking rates. On the other side, you give an attractive point to them to use the public transport by halving the rates. So any policy needs to look at both issues. I mean, policy makers cannot act in vacuum. I mean, that we made this policy, it should be acceptable. I mean, you need to look at from the consumer point of view and see whether there is some sufficient incentive for that person to act. So let me not go any further than saying that it's delightful to have the RBI seminar here in MIDS. And I'm quite sure at the end of the day, you not only will have your recommendations on how to proceed for the finances part of it, but we also will, if necessary, induce another set of seminar for looking at the various policies and various aspects of what is being done in different parts of the country and how this can be brought into use or implemented across the country. Thank you very much, and wish you all very best in your deliberations. Thank you.
Sri Gopal Swami, the chairperson of the MIDS, Professor Venkatachalam, the RBI chair professor, the members of the faculty, the research scholars, and my dear colleagues from the Reserve Bank of India, and ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and greetings from the Reserve Bank of India. The climate change is a very topical subject which is deliberated, discussed, and debated across the globe, the national level, the state level, the universities, the academia, and the autonomous institutes like the MIDS too. The climate change refers to long-term shifts in the temperature and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, such as through variation in the solar cycle. But since 1800, the human activity has been the main driver of the climate change, primarily due to burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapped around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising the temperatures. Increasing the temperatures caused by climate change are accelerating the melting of ice, which raises sea levels and leads to flooding and erosion. There is a mounting global consensus that climate change is putting a stress on the growth trajectory of nations worldwide, with evident economic, social, and environmental implications. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2020, the top 5 risks over the coming decade in terms of likelihood are all climate related, including human-made environmental disasters, climate action failure, natural disasters, biodiversity loss, and extreme weather. The climate action failure, as the chairperson was telling, the developed countries, though they have developed at the cost of the poor, but they are unwilling to part with their efforts and also the finance for reducing the climate change. While the world is grappling with the challenges posed by the climate change, the developing economies like India are particularly vulnerable. The climate risk as a material aspect is going to play a critical role in charting out national level policies, business strategies, and reorientation of the finance in an emerging economy like our country. The climate of India is quite diversified in nature, from the Himalayan crown to the flat beaches. A significant transition in climate is very much visible. The climate varies from the freezing temperatures of the Himalayan mountains to the tropical climatic conditions in South India. The northeastern states receive the maximum rainfall, whereas the northwestern states, dried of water, make up the arid desert like the Thar and Great Indian Desert. Such a vastness of climatic conditions has always benefited India too. India has one of the highest densities of economic activity in the world, and a large section of the population rely on the natural resource base for their livelihoods, with a high dependence on rainfall. The unforeseen weather patterns can make it difficult to maintain and grow crops. In an agricultural economy like India, where rainfall is so vital, the climate change has an immediate impact on the Indian economy. The impact of climate change on the Indian economy includes the lower crop yields, the adverse impact on the livestock, the reduced labor workforce and their productivity, the energy crisis, impact on infrastructure, impact on the drainage system, and the exacerbation of the inequality in the system. India is currently one of the fastest growing economies in the world, home to almost 1/6 of the humanity. The country's growth momentum is an integral part of the world's sustainable development goals. Though India's contribution in global warming is minimal and its per capita electricity and gas consumption remain well below the world's average, India is still committed to combating the climate change by choosing the developing strategies which align with the objective of low carbon footprint and an objective of net zero emission by 2070, that is nearly 50 years down the line. India consistently ranked as a high-performing country as per the Climate Change Performance Index. The country's rank improved from being 10th in 2022 to 8th in 2023. At the COP26 conference, the Honorable Prime Minister presented the agenda for the country in the form of 5 nectar elements, that is Panchamrit, to combat climate change. They include to achieve 500 gigawatt GW of non-fossil installed electricity capacity by 2030, to meet 50% of the electricity requirement from renewable sources of energy, by reduce the carbon intensity of the economy by less than 45%, net zero emission by 2070, reduce the total projected carbon emission 1 billion tons by 2030. To achieve this, the country has taken various policies at international level and the state levels. The policies that are not limited to national urban policy framework, National Mission for Sustainable Habitat, Jal Jeevan Mission, Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, National Urban Sanitation Policy, National Solar Mission, etc., etc. The central government has taken several measures to reform the energy sector and usher in climate-friendly energy transition that will deliver energy security, affordability, and sustainability. The steps include the proposing the Electricity Amendment Act 2020, proposing amendments to Energy Conservation Act 2001, and PM Gati Shakti. The climate change is increasingly being recognized globally as a source of financial risk for banks as well. Recognizing the importance of impending climate change related issues and the risk it poses to the financial sector, Reserve Bank has released a discussion paper on climate risk and sustainable finance in July 2022. It has outlined a roadmap for banks and other regulated entities to mitigate the climate-related risk as per the global best practices. The Reserve Bank also joined the central banks and the supervisors network for greening the financial system as a member in April 2021 to benefit from the membership of the NGFS by learning from and contributing to global efforts on green finance. Combating climate change must be a joint effort by the policy makers, the industry, academia within the country, as well as through international cooperation, especially for required finance and low carbon technology transfer. Sustainable finance is a part of the main work stream of the finance track of G20, which India has assumed the presidency, and Reserve Bank is also integral part of it. As the global economy continued to be plagued with the lingering effects of COVID-19, the several challenges emerge, of which climate risk remains the key one across the globe, and G20 aims to find pragmatic solutions to these through focused dialogues and deliberations. Today's panel discussion is part of RBI's continued effort to engage the academia and the policy makers in the form of deliberations and discussions on climate change as a shared global challenge and to spread awareness on the topic. As the chairman has put it in the beginning, the climate change is a very contemporary and very important aspect. And all the policymakers, research scholars, and the intellectuals, they'll have to discuss and come to certain solutions which are implementable so that the climate risk can be reduced to a great extent, if not totally eliminated. With this, I would like to wish the deliberations all a fruitful one, and also I would like to wish all the research scholars the best in their future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We will now start the panel discussion. I invite the panelists on the stage and honor them with bouquets.
Good morning to all. Welcome to this panel discussion on Indian economy and climate change, being jointly organized by Reserve Bank of India and Madras Institute of Development Studies. Indeed, this is a unique event in the sense that this panel discussion is being conducted as part of the G20 program, as well as part of the Golden Jubilee celebrations that we are having at MIDS. MIDS has, traveled for more than 50 years now. MIDS was founded by the great educationist, economist, and development thinker, Professor Malcolm Adiseshiah, in the year 1971. And in 1977, this institute has been reconstituted as a national institute, and funding comes from the central government through Indian Council for Social Science Research, popularly known as ICSSR, and from the state government of Tamil Nadu. And we have 15 faculty here working on different aspects of development. For example, we do research on poverty, inequality, gender issues, Panchayat Raj, environment, water, climate change, urbanization, and various other issues related to development. And MIDS, as you know, is one of the 30 ICSSR institutions and one of the leading social science research institutes in Tamil Nadu especially. Professor Malcolm Adiseshiah wanted to make this institute a policy think tank 50 years back, and a premier institute in social science research, ultimately contributing to the enhancement of the welfare of the people of India. So in order to accomplish his academic goals, MIDS faculty do research and teach on various social science subjects. And we have right now got a PhD program is the major program at our institute. And we have got around 30 PhD students in the institute right now, working on various issues related to social sciences. And almost equal number of PhDs have been already produced by MIDS during the past 50 years. Many of our PhD alumni are acting as our great ambassadors in various organizations right now. We also take up research projects funded by the central government and the state government of Tamil Nadu, as well as by various international funding agencies like the World Bank, GIZ, European Commission, etc. And some of the currently completed projects include COVID Pulse Survey, which we did during the COVID pandemic period, peri-urban agriculture, wetland valuation, coastal fishery, urban housing, and other projects. Yeah. At present, we are running a huge project called the Tamil Nadu Household Panel Survey Project, funded by the state government of Tamil Nadu, which looks at the socio-economic conditions of the households in Tamil Nadu and how the welfare policies impact on the socio-economic conditions of these households. And indeed, during the past 50 years, MIDS has published more than 260 books, 240 working papers, 3,000 and odd articles in national and international journals on various issues like poverty, inequality, gender issues, water management, both in Tamil as well as in English. Also, our faculty are teaching in other premier institutions like IIM Kozhikode, IIM Amritsar, IIT Delhi, IIT Chennai, Madras School of Economics, etc. And indeed, in India, teaching and research are going in two different directions. And so our faculty indeed are trying to kind of fill in this gap between research and teaching by way of taking up teaching assignments in other teaching institutions like universities and IITs, IIM, etc. And also we conduct a large number of training programs, research methodology workshops, seminars, panel discussions regularly at MIDS to disseminate the knowledge related to development issues. Similarly, faculty participate in outreach programs such as research methodology workshops, refresher courses, guest lectures, organized by various other institutions also. Indeed, we would like to exploit this memorable occasion to thank all those who have supported us in terms of accomplishing the goal set by Professor Malcolm Adiseshiah 50 years back, the academic goals, and we are very grateful to all of them. And about this workshop, indeed, I am very grateful to Reserve Bank of India for having mooted an idea of having this joint panel discussion on an important topic, namely climate change and how it affects the Indian economy, what are the issues right now we are facing, and what are the kinds of measures that we have undertaken to address these issues, and what is being expected in the coming years in order to deal with this very important kind of issue affecting our economy. So I am very grateful to the Reserve Bank of India. So in that sense, they have provided us, MIDS, an opportunity to work closely with them academically. So regarding the topic, let me very briefly highlight some of the points which we may discuss during the panel discussion. For example, Indian economy has become the fifth largest economy with $3.5 trillion worth of nominal GDP. And it has become a third largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity with $11.7 trillion worth of GDP in 2020-22. And very recently, our Chief Economic Advisor, Mr. Anantha Nageswaran, said that with 6.5% to 7% economic growth in nominal terms, we will be able to achieve 5 trillion economy by 2025-26, or if not, we can slightly push our goalpost to 2026-27 in order to achieve this target. And by 2030, we will be achieving $7 trillion worth of economy. So that is what has been predicted by Mr. Anantha Nageswaran. But I would like to recall a statement made by our former Governor, Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Subbarao, who was holding the governor's position from 2008 to 2013. In one of the press meetings, a reporter asked him, what is your prediction about the economic growth in future for the coming months? He said, it all depends on the monsoon. So it's a very kind of important statement. So our Indian economy is dependent on the environment in general and the monsoon in particular. But if you look at the monsoon pattern of late, what we find is that the monsoon is becoming more erratic. And the erratic monsoon is being caused by two different factors. One is the natural factor, like El Nino effect, which occurs naturally. And the other one is the anthropogenic human-made factor, namely climate change. So climate change, of course, in the case of El Nino, we can predict what kind of the impact that we are going to have, especially in terms of rainfall and, in other climate variables, actually. But in the case of climate change, we are not in a position to predict what is going to happen in future, right? Because climate change produces extreme events like, very intense cyclones. For example, right now, California is under floods, actually, severe floods. Very intense cyclones, landslides, huge landslides, torrential rains, and the devastating floods, so on and so forth. The point is that the nature and magnitude of the climate change can be assessed only after they occurred. So that's the situation, actually. That means that the nature and the impact of the climate change effects, the extreme outcomes that are going to happen in future cannot be predicted at all, because the current events are not equivalent to the future events, actually, right? So in terms of magnitude, in terms of nature, they are entirely different. And that is where the problem arises, because we have to properly model everything in order to predict the impact of climate change. But right now, the modeling is also affected by lack of data and other things. For example, how do we establish a valid and reliable damage function, the damage that is being caused by different types of factors related to climate, right? So in an economy, so modeling is one thing, lack of data is another thing. And the economy, the climate change extreme events are producing a kind of cascading effect which cannot be predicted, actually. For example, in order to assess the economy-wide damage being caused by the climate change, we need to kind of develop different kinds of nodes, actually. For example, in 2022, the North India was experiencing severe heat wave attributed to climate change problem. As a result, what happened was that there was a drastic reduction in the wheat output. Some of the estimates suggest that the wheat output declined by 1 million tons, actually. Indeed, during 2022, our farmers, especially wheat growing farmers in North India, were earning a substantial amount of profits because of the fact that Ukraine-Russia war caused a lot of supply shortage in the international market for wheat, actually, okay? But then what happened was that because of the reduction in the wheat output, the prices of wheat have gone up, actually, right? And domestically, we started experiencing food inflation. And as a result, the government had to intervene, especially central government, had to intervene in terms of banning the wheat export, okay? So all of a sudden, the farmers were worse off, actually, right? So basically, the climate change impact, rainfall pattern change, and then, reduction in food grains output, inflation, how inflation affects poorer people, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a very complex situation. So we are living in a complex situation. Indeed, I wanted to tell you one more thing before moving on to the panelists. That is, so some 10 years back, you might have seen books titled like Skeptical Environmentalist, There is no climate change, all those kinds of things. I was also, one of those who believed in no climate change impact. Or I very strongly believed, because whatever the kind of climate change impact that we will experience, we will be able to deal with them with the existing kind of tools and principles from economics. Since I am trained in neoclassical economics, I was also a skeptical climate change person, actually. But in 2015, what happened was that my own house was inundated with flood water. Then only I realized that there is a climate change, and it is impacting very severely the economy and people's lives, etc., etc. Then I started becoming a skeptical classical economist, neoclassical economist, actually, right? So the point here is that climate change has come into being, and it is kind of impacting the economy in a devastating manner. So we encounter with different types of issues related to climate change. So as I said, there are issues and there are measures undertaken by various governments. It's not only central government, but also the state government has pumped enormous amount of money into various activities to deal with the climate change impact. And then the local governments also play a crucial role in terms of mitigating and adapting to climate change. Okay, so now we have a very eminent panelists here. So they will enlighten us on these broader issues, namely the issues caused by climate change, the measures undertaken, and the future measures that need to be undertaken to deal with these issues. I am very grateful to the panelists for having agreed to come here and talk about climate change related issue. Let me introduce our panelists. 1 minute, please. Our first speaker is Professor T. Jayaraman, who was with the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, Mumbai, between 2008 and 2020, before joining MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in Chennai. He is a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, National Communications to the UNFCCC and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Also a member of India's delegation to several IPCC sessions and the Conference of Parties of UNFCCC. Previously, he was a member of the Kerala State Planning Board, Government of Kerala. His skills and expertise lie in string theory, conformal field theory, climate change and agriculture, climate change policy, theoretical physics, amongst others. Professor Jayaraman's work takes a transdisciplinary perspective, integrating socio-economic aspects based on social sciences, along with the natural science and technological aspects of climate change, focusing on equity issues at the national and global scale. Now we will welcome Professor Jayaraman with a bouquet, and I would like to invite Dr. Hafsal to hand over the bouquet to Professor Jayaraman. Thank you, Hafsal. Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor R. Krishnamurthy, who is a geologist specialized in the field of satellite remote sensing applications in coastal management and disaster management. His PhD thesis, awarded in the year 1996, is the first in the field of satellite remote sensing from the College of Engineering, Guindy, Anna University. He has 32 years of teaching and research experience, and he has served in different capacities in Anna University, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and the University of Madras. As a recipient of the Environmental Award by the Government of Tamil Nadu, he has produced several significant end-user-oriented research outputs, such as Climate Action Plan, Climate Disaster Resilience Index, and Climate Disaster Recovery Processes for Chennai, and Tsunami Vulnerability Atlas for Chennai Coast. His remarkable research accomplishments include participation in India's National Program on Marine Satellite Remote Sensing Information Service and establishment of India's Tsunami Early Warning System. He has contributed to kind of, many training programs, and he has got a lot of publications. Now, I would like to formally welcome Professor Krishnamurthy with a bouquet, and I would like to invite Dr. Shromona to hand over the bouquet to Dr. Krishnamurthy. Our next speaker is Professor Kavi Kumar, who is currently working as professor at Madras School of Economics, Chennai. Professor Kavi Kumar has more than 25 years of experience in research, teaching, and industry. Indeed, Professor Kavi Kumar was working on climate change when we did not even know the concept of climate change in the Indian context. After receiving his bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering, after receiving his bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering, he completed his PhD in development economics at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai. His research interests include economics of environment, economics of climate change, and development economics. Professor Kavi Kumar has been associated with various international and national institutions, including the World Bank, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, GIZ, British High Commission, Tata Energy Research Institute, Institute of Economic Growth, etc., for various research assignments. During 2008 to 2015, Professor Kavi Kumar had coordinated the activities of the Center of Excellence in Environmental Economics supported by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. He has also served and is serving as a member of various committees of the Government of Tamil Nadu and Government of India. Now, I would like to formally welcome Professor Kavi Kumar with a bouquet, and I would request Dr. Umanath to hand over the bouquet to Professor Kavi Kumar. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Arivudai Nambi. Dr. Nambi is the Director and Strategy Head of the Climate Resilience Practice at World Resources Institute, India, where he oversees a portfolio of projects that help build climate resilience at different levels. He is currently leading the design and implementation of research and policy work supporting mainstreaming adaptation into development policies and processes, and promotion of transformative adaptation through experiential learnings at various levels. His work focuses on climate proofing of development plans, creating access to climate finance, and scaling up both investments and good practices in climate resilient initiatives at local, subnational, and national levels. He has been actively engaged with select streams of work under Global Commission on Adaptation. Dr. Nambi comes to WRI with 2 decades of extensive experience in research, project management, and implementation of community-based adaptation projects across Asia and Africa. His international experience includes stints with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, UNEP, CGIAR, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Program, and MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, primarily working on climate, biodiversity conservation, natural resource management, and governance related issue. Dr. Nambi pursued his doctoral degree from Maxwell School, Syracuse University in USA, and then holds 2 postgraduate degrees, one in development studies from Cambridge University, and another in public management, and a BS in physics from the University of Madras. So I'd like to now formally welcome Dr. Nambi with a bouquet, and Dr. Kripa, can you please give the bouquet and welcome Professor Nambi. Thank you. So thank you so much. Now we will move on to the panel discussion. Each panelist will have 20 minutes for presentation, and then at the end, we will have a floor discussion. So now I'd like to invite Professor Jayaraman for making his valuable comments.
Okay. Ms. Uma Shankar of the RBI, Professor Venkatachalam, Director currently at MIDS. My distinguished colleagues on the panel, old friends. We haven't met some of us for a couple of years. It's a good opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be back at Madras Institute of Development Studies. I did my PhD next door at the AC College campus of the University of Madras. And I was always had, of course, a number of good friends who were research scholars and students at that time. Of course, one must recall in this context, especially on the occasion of the Golden Jubilee, There were the stalwarts like, of course, Professor Adiseshiah, Dr. C.T. Kurian, devoted for many years to the study of regional economies, particularly of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. His introduction to the study of poverty, inequality, etc., in the context and development in the context of Tamil Nadu was an essential part of our, I would say, growing up. It was not simply, formal economics, but that if I have any perspective on the question of climate and development, the work of people like C.T. Kurian, I think, still continues to play a fundamental role in the way we think about it. One must also recall the towering presence of the, of brilliant administrator researchers like Mr. S. Guhan, the towering presence of Professor Vaidyanathan, and a number of other scholars, perhaps among some of whom we have lost, like Professor M.S.S. Pandian. So, it's always a pleasure and honor to be at MIDS to speak. So, this is a vast topic, and since we panelists have not coordinated before, we are going to be overlapping with each other a bit. In overlapping, I hope, you will also hear some disagreement. One of the most boring things about the study of climate change and environmental science is everybody is desperate to agree. I mean, what kind of science is this if you cannot disagree? So, if one says, oh, rainfall is affecting wheat production, someone will say it's affecting more. Nobody will dare publish a paper saying that, perhaps it is not affecting as much as we think it is, So the lack of a certain intrinsic skeptical outlook that should be the hallmark of science, okay, sometimes is lost in environmental and climate science because we are all so busy convincing the world that doom and disaster is going to happen if we don't change our ways and repent and return to the path of salvation. So, okay, so I am not going to take that route to the discussion. So what I would like to do in the brief 15 minutes that one has at one's disposal, to outline some of the key elements of what it takes to think about climate in the context of a developing country like India. So, Professor Venkatachalam provided some of the basic statistics about the Indian economy, and certainly in terms of size and scale, India is a determinate weight in the world, and it's plays a very essential part of the global economy. But nevertheless, it is also true that given its population and the general levels of human, social and economic development, the prevalence of deprivation, malnutrition, etc., we are very much a developing economy. Okay, and so it is this twin conundrum that on the one hand we play a determinate weight in the global economy, but on the other hand, in terms of our people and their well-being, we are very far from being considered a developed country, is the crux of the problem in many ways. And to forget this is to sort of have the Ramayana without Rama, if you will, So let me just make that clear at the beginning. So to get hold of this, let me start with framing the problem of climate change. And this is, of course, not natural climate change. This is climate change, global warming due to emissions of anthropogenic origin. There is a climate change issue for the atmosphere of Venus. We are not worried about it. We don't have seminars on it in MIDS because we don't live on Venus. So it is because of the fact that the impacts are anthropogenic, that it affects human society and the ecosystem of which human beings, on which human beings depend. At the same time that it is our activity, economic activity, that has given rise to the problem of global warming that makes it what it is. So that's the first thing. How do we frame the problem? So there is one popular framing which started off in the beginning, which regrettably is actually profoundly erroneous, is to think of carbon dioxide as pollution. Now that's a really strange thing to say, considering that 15 years ago, all about the great discovery of the 20th century in science is that we are carbon-based life. All our work is about the centrality of carbon to life itself. So to call carbon dioxide and the whole shift from oxidizing to a reducing atmosphere through the history of the planet is the very source of the origin of life. So if you call carbon dioxide pollution, obviously that we are sort of starting off on the wrong foot. On the other hand, it is also true that the presence of carbon dioxide beyond a certain amount in the atmosphere would lead the Earth's system actually, because it is not just in the atmosphere, it is absorbed by the ocean, then it is recycled through vegetation and land. So we have to take all of that into account. So the question is, how much carbon dioxide emissions can the Earth hold? Okay? This framing of the question that began with the 5th assessment report of the IPCC and has been reinforced very significantly in this 6th assessment report is the crux of the problem. So if you want to limit temperature increase above pre-industrial levels, okay, till then one can take the Earth's temperature as fairly Earth's global average surface temperature, okay? If you take that as an average, that has more or less been steady. But it is only after the Industrial Revolution where we discovered fossil fuels. Now, of course, if we hadn't discovered fossil fuels, we would have denuded the earth of all vegetation before the 20th century. That's a separate story. So fossil fuels, once it started, we started emissions. So how much gross emissions can we have from all sources, including deforestation, etc., of carbon dioxide, which is the primary greenhouse gas, to keep temperatures to a certain limit, 1.5, 2 degrees, or whatever it is, over pre-industrial levels. And this is called the global carbon budget. Okay? So the total is a tricky number to calculate. So you can usefully think of it as the past emissions, which is about 2,500 billion tons of carbon dioxide between 1850 and 2019 or so, and what remains for us, which we are allowed to emit as the world up to a given temperature limit. So we have emitted about 2,500 gigatons, as I said, billion tons of carbon dioxide, and this, of which about 60%, 58%, has been emitted by the developed countries. China has then contributed a percentage which is lower, of course, than its share of the global population, but still a certain percentage. But if you leave aside China, leave aside the developed countries, the rest of the world more or less has emitted less than about 30% of the total cumulative emissions. So the idea of, and now from the carbon budget, this whole idea you can show that there is about the warming proceeds by about 0.45 degrees centigrade increase in temperature for every 1,000 billion tons of carbon dioxide which is emitted. So we have emitted about 2,500. So we are about at 1.1 degrees centigrade. So 1.5 degrees centigrade, if it is the limit, we are already 2/3 of the way there. Okay? So now the question is, that's all very well. So you may say, okay, let's shut off the carbon dioxide. Unfortunately, you can't do that. And that's the crux of the problem. Not because we are all wedded to fossil fuels, everybody loves coal, etc., but because it is the fundamental source of energy. It's not investment in coal. It is not the profit to be made by coal. It is not the jobs that are provided by coal. That is not where it begins. That's all part of the story. But where it begins is coal is fundamentally necessary to the production of energy. And energy in various forms, not only coal, eventually all fossil fuels, oil and gas included, are essential to the way we run our modern economy. So how do we do this? So one part of it is we have various technological solutions coming on board. It is not as if we don't have a roadmap for what is possible. But a lot of the roadmap is also not visible. So there is a lot of speculation that is going around, and of course modelers are modelers. You can't stop them. As they say, boys will be boys, so modelers will be modelers. And they make all kinds of nice models with all kinds of lovely assumptions. But unfortunately it is not clear that if you are the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, that you should be really buying all what the models tell you. So we know certain things. Renewable energy, we know solar energy, we can use solar power, wind power. But you can get into trouble. Even, for instance, Tamil Nadu has problems with the amount of solar power it has already, or renewable energy it has put on the grid, because it is not, a lot of it is older power, so you are paying more. Cheaper power you cannot access. And the fact is, other people were supposed to take the power from you and they are not doing it. So you have fossil fuel investment which is running idle and which is actually cheaper. You are paying for more expensive renewables, and the Minister of Electricity from our state is not happy over it and has complained on several occasions. The other thing is, there is this whole competitive thing for India to look good. So during the COVID period also, when industry was at a downturn and demand for power was going down, at this time, in order to show the world that, we are keeping up our commitments, the government of India, through its various appropriate authority, declared that we will continue to privilege renewables. But then, this privileging of renewables drives more efficient and baseload power plants in the coal thermal power sector into difficulties. So even simply expanding renewable energy is not an unproblematic exercise. So all of this have to be taken together, and there are many sectors of the economy where simply we do not have the wherewithal, either financially or technology, to move into a so-called green or renewable stage. We can discuss the details later during discussion time. I don't want to spell out sector by sector, but one amusing thing I must tell you is, there's a lot of popular talk about decarbonized steel. And that's utterly amusing if you have studied even a little bit of engineering or metallurgy, because steel is steel by the addition of carbon to iron. So, what exactly is decarbonized steel is not something people pay much attention to, though everybody has it in the model about decarbonizing the steel sector. So you have to be a little careful of the others. So, what's the bottom line on this? And the bottom line, I think quite correctly from India, my group of me and my colleagues have contributed to that understanding a bit, is the fact that the global carbon budget is a global resource. And like a global resource, must be equitably shared. Now, if you do not want to take a normative position like this, but at least you must recognize that it is a global commons problem, the global carbon budget. And the appropriation of the global commons by a determinate few and who continue to appropriate a disproportionate share of the global commons is the crux of the problem of dealing with mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is on one side. Now, the second aspect of this is how does it play out in the global arena? So, as the chairperson himself commented, the rich are very concerned about their lifestyles not being affected, number one. The rich countries are very concerned that they want a soft landing into the green economy stage, not a hard landing. Okay? In India, we are used to load shedding, no? You just switch off the power, load shedding. Earlier, whenever we had a shortage of power, load shedding. And the people would put up with it. Because of our emphasis on renewables and are not paying attention to coal supply, last summer we had load shedding. This summer, at least, it seems as if in March itself, the Central Electricity Authority is a little more awake. So we have load shedding. In the United States, you don't do load shedding. In UK, you don't do load shedding. And this is the crux of the... am I running out of time? Yeah. So this is the crux of the problem. So they want a soft landing without any hard options or choices. They are already in a tizzy because of the gas and oil crisis. Nothing is coming from Russia. So you can't get gas in Southeast Asia because all the gas on the high seas is being diverted to the Europe and United States. So this is the state of affairs. Okay? So they want a soft landing into the green stage and they want to maintain economic dominance. These three things which have a history which predates the climate change problem continue to drive the global discourse on climate change. And the way global agencies, and this I am sorry to say, includes international aid agencies, it includes multilateral banks, it includes United Nations agencies, and I am sorry to say international NGOs. So all of them are very much part of this nexus. So the flip side of the story, and this is really inbuilt into a lot of the economic modeling of global climate impacts, is about what? Is about restricting energy use, restricting not just electricity use, restricting primary energy use, restricting electricity use, restricting growth, restricting per capita income across the developing world with the exception of China. Now China, they can't do anything. So since models have no history in the way they are constructed, the way it begins, they leave China out, and the rest of all these predictions which are made about how to reach 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade, limit warming, etc., are founded on this kind of assumption. So obviously this is unsustainable in two ways. When 70% or roughly, let's say 60% or 65% of the world, Europe, the Annex 1 countries, as we call the rich countries, are about 18%. 17% is about China's population. Together, that's about 35%. So 65% of the world contributes only 30% of emissions. So, how can you drive mitigation and reach 1.5 degrees where the burden is borne by these people? It is like trying to squeeze water out of stone. You won't get it. Second thing is, even if you have some imagined developments in technology which makes this eventually possible, these are the countries which are the most lacking in financial and technological resources. So unfortunately, this is where the global debate lies. Adaptation is a slightly mixed story, so I don't want to get into that now because I don't have too much time. Then other colleagues, I'm sure, will speak about it and we can discuss it later. So what do we do in India? This is the question. So on the one hand, since this is the age of, what shall we say? What is a polite way to say it? I want to say nasty ways, A polite way to say it is our desire and aspirations for development are often outrunning reality. Let me say that, okay? So we have grand schemes, everybody says we will be world leaders. So all these people telling you, you will be world leaders in green technology. Excuse me, which technology were we world leaders? I agree we are a software superpower, but we are a software superpower on subcontracts. Okay? Let's not forget this. This is it's an unfortunate fact. I'm not saying that the software industry does not contribute a very important source of income to the Indian economy. It's a very important part. Its social and cultural connotations are very important. I believe they are a source of modernity in Indian society. All of this I am willing to accept. But it is true, it's on subcontract, and the rest of our manufacturing is constantly in trouble. We always are bemoaning the state. So why do you expect that India will be a leader in green technology? Especially when you consider that 70% or more of the world's solar panel production is in China. And we have a 500 gigawatt target for renewables, or we have some 220 gigaton for gigawatt for solar power, whatever is the number. Our production linked incentives are going to reach us to what, 5, 10, 20 gigawatts. So we are not even a drop in the ocean. So the first thing I think we need to realize is that given the fact that our footprint in terms of contributing emissions to the state or the current state of emissions, as the chairperson pointed out, our contribution is minimal. India, Southern Asia, South Asia has contributed less than 4% of global cumulative CO2 emissions in 1850. Now, if you want, you can pat yourself on the back and say how green I am. But actually, it is because of our extreme deprivation and poverty that we are here, with no industrial development. But whatever it is, our footprint is extraordinarily low. So I don't think we are the problem in that sense. So our first point should be, what about development? So I think the message I want to underline, and I'll stop here at this point, is to keep underlining the fact that for India, the first defense against climate change is not electric vehicles. You want to buy electric vehicles, please go ahead. But it is not I appreciate the enthusiasm of the Chennai Corporation, but to think that your emissions of Chennai will be capped from 2023, I'm sorry, that's fantasy, It means not a single scooter will be sold or a single automobile will be sold in Chennai. You think that's going to happen? Not a single new gas connection, nothing is going to happen. Let's not, live in this kind of world. So for India, I think our first criterion is development. And that's industry, that's human development. Say, for instance, one of the, there was this extraordinary debate in Parliament after COP26, where people said, oh, tell us the roadmap to net zero. Prime Minister has promised net zero. Tell us the roadmap to net zero. Have you ever heard of Parliament asking for a roadmap for zero malnutrition? Have you heard of a Parliament debate where we ask for zero hunger? Zero violence against women? What is this enthusiasm for net zero in emissions that overtakes all other societal concerns? So this, I think, we have to get right. And this is essential. And anything that the IPCC says, it is absolutely clear from the work of any work done across the world, that the first line of defense against climate change is development. When we talk of vulnerable poor countries and not so vulnerable rich countries, what distinguishes them? Development. So let us return the focus to development. Let us return the focus to human development, the growth of livelihoods, the provision of decent jobs and employment, and we must assert the right to use a fair share of the global commons, the carbon budget, in this process. I believe this policy is articulated very clearly in the long-term low carbon development strategy of the Government of India. Unfortunately, it is very ill-read. So I urge people here to read it. And what I thought I would start with in this discussion to contribute here was to underline where that policy actually comes from. So I'll stop at this point. I hope I have not run too much over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jayaraman. If there are some quick clarificatory questions, one or two, yeah.
Sir, very insightful to listen to you. And indeed, many points I agree. Recently concluded Chennai Center for China Studies conference on China's part to green, and we spoke something very similar to what you mentioned regarding e-vehicles. But the concept of the first line of defense against the climate change, you mentioned is development. Can you be more specific? What kind of development are we referring here?
Provision of food, water, clothing, shelter. Number one. Number two, provision of livelihoods and incomes. Otherwise, livelihoods, they are all thinking of Selai machine. You have to be careful. So, livelihood generation in many cases is a Selai machine and papad making. It's amazing how far that still continues. So let's get out of that. It's about this thing. On gender, how can we have 19% of women's workforce participation? What kind of a society is this? Let's focus on these. And when you will realize that when it comes to talking about how to generate incomes, etc., you will see that manufacturing and other such aspects are very important. That way, I think in Tamil Nadu, the focus on manufacturing and some attempt to boost the manufacturing still continues quite sharply. Organic farming is not the way to go, in my honest opinion. We'll discuss this separately. Productivity in agriculture is our foremost concern. And we simply have taken our eyes off that ball. We have taken our eyes off that ball. 10 years ago, I wrote in an evaluation of climate change and agriculture in India that the Indian agriculture research system was capable of providing the kind of new varieties, etc., which were required. And I did that based on a sheer volume of literature that considered productivity impact of climate change on Indian agriculture across crops, regions, etc. But I am not hopeful of that in the present, and I think there are too many other trends. Other issues have their place, but I think we are taking our eyes off the ball on productivity in agriculture. At the same time, the structural issues of Indian agriculture, especially the over-dependence of a large section of the disproportionate section of the population on agriculture, these are the key issues, and attending to that is essential.
So how will it translate to a fight against climate change?
The fight against climate change cannot be a so overriding thing. We will fight for development. In the process, we'll have to manage the consequences of global warming.
Right.
Development, a livable, sustainable, equitable world first. Not a cool world. Well, then we'll figure out whether there is equity or not. I think we shouldn't get the question back to front.
Any other?
Thank you, sir.
Question?
Maybe we will have substantial questions at the end. So thank you very much, sir. Now I'd like to invite Professor Krishnamurthy to make his presentation.
Okay, very good morning to all of you. My presentation is of totally of different nature, and this is pertaining to how the community resilience in Chennai. This is the case study we carried out jointly with the Chennai Corporation and supported by the Koeitai University in Japan during the year 2010. And when that UNISDR has launched the global campaign on disaster risk reduction, and the Chennai Corporation also formally enrolled on this global campaign under the title, My City is Getting Ready. So that was the initiative during the 2010, and then we thought of studying the resilience of the community in Chennai. So we took up this case study, and then you know that Chennai is invariably facing different type of disaster, not only the tsunami-like disaster, but also the chronic disaster like shoreline erosion, which is aggravated by the climate change because of the sea level rise. That also we are seeing. But you know that 2004 onwards, when till 2004 people used to run behind the water lorries, and 2005 onwards, invariably the city is getting flooded almost every alternate years, and we are seeing that the cyclone is crossing almost every alternate years. That is the reason behind we want to focus on the resilience of the community in Chennai, very particularly. And highlighting about that the climate change related research in the University of Madras. One of the important initiatives to study about the climate disaster resilience index, and second one is the drought vulnerability. That is a purely of research and development project as a scientist from the Department of Space. He carried out a study how to study the soil moisture and how to give a forecast to the farmers on what are the probable areas of for showing all these things. But that I am not going to highlight in this presentation. And third one is being in a higher education institution, how we introduce this disaster management in the higher education curriculum. So these are the things I am going to cover, primarily about the climate disaster resilience index. And this is a very, very challenging part because which requires a lot of field data. That is the reason behind we involve formally the Chennai Corporation is one of the collaborators for this study. And we have collected all that the field data with the support of the zonal officers from the field. And on the 5 important aspects we are taken into account for the resilience study. The resilience with reference to physical infrastructure, and resilience with reference to social and economic resilience, institutional and natural. You see that each aspect we have that 5 parameters. And again, there are interrelated data we collected from the field. The outcome of this resilience study shows that the resilience is not uniform in the entire Chennai city. It varies from site to site. And the important research findings from this study is especially the older part of the Chennai, especially the zones which covers in the northern part of the Chennai, the community is having a resilience with reference to economic, social, all these aspects. When coming to the overall resilience of the entire city, we can see that the recently developed part is having more resilience when compared to the older part. This is the very important observation we have seen during this resilience study. And one important thing is what we found even after experiencing 2015 flood. Professor Venkatachalam mentioned that as a professor in MIDS, he also experienced the impact of 15. You see that think about the community living below poverty line. So this is a very, very crucial situation. We observed that the economic resilience is more powerful than when compared to other resilience. That also I can highlight in the coming presentation. And going into the micro level, we also taken 2 identical wars
which is very close to the water body, which already experienced this impact of monsoon flood. And those ward level, why we have taken this small micro level study is because how to bring all these stakeholders in the common platform where the stakeholder participation is very, very important for this kind of disaster recovery process. That is the reason behind we also, from the broader study to the micro level, we have carried out. And this is all the very simple spatial maps pertaining to that particular ward, which highlight about which are all the houses affected during the flood and what are the land use and other amenities available within this particular ward. And this really helped the Chennai Corporation to focus on the micro level. And then continuation of our climate disaster resilience index, we also advocated for the participation of the local machinery in this decision-making process. And we taken that then mayor of the Chennai city to participate in the Asian Ministerial Conference in Incheon. And that was held in 2010. And then we moved towards the preparation of the climate action plans jointly with the Chennai Corporation. That was the greatest achievement we have made through this trilateral collaboration. After the 2015 flood, you know that our interest was how the community is bouncing back. What is the recovery process is taking place, that we carried out jointly with the ETS juries and the University of Madras. We had taken two constituencies, especially the Mylapore and Velachery. Mylapore, you know that there is a older part of the Chennai, and Velachery is the recently developed part. But when compared that to the impact of 15 flood, the recovery process, especially the recovery of all this, the important aspects like electricity and then the water, sanitation, all these things, it took nearly about double the time for the, especially for the Velachery area. The reason is Velachery was worst affected when compared to Mylapore. And this is one important thing. And another thing is all that important recovery mechanism, especially the electricity, water, communication. You can see that the Mylapore took nearly about a week time, but it is double the time for Velachery to recover from this particular aspect. And compared to the socio-economic dimension in these two constituencies, because I already highlighted about the economic resilience varies, and economic resilience is very high, especially in the recently developed part of the Chennai. Because we have so many IT corridors and then new developments, the employment opportunities are more towards the recently developed part. And that is the reason behind, especially that the last part one, you can see that income. So that the community in Velachery is bounced back when compared to the older part of the Mylapore. So these are all the findings. And you see that the community has given feedback that during our household survey, what are the important aspects required to bounce back from this kind of climate related disaster like the urban flood, especially the solid waste management, sanitization, and the electricity, road. All these things are all very much important. And then all this our documentation, the report, two important reports. One is on the Chennai zone profile with reference to the resilience index, and another one is CDRP, that is how the community is recovering. And these details, along with other peer-reviewed journal publications, these are all available online, open online. And then we also documented a book under the title Building Resilient Urban Communities. If you find time, you can read through it. And if you have any questions, may be able to answer to you now.
Okay, if there are no clarificatory questions, then thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We will move on to Dr. Nambi now.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure being here. And all wise word has been said. There cannot be more eloquent than Dr. Jayaraman talking about development. Now, let me put it in a perspective. I am more come from the background of a practitioner. I talk from the practitioner's perspective. So, my focus is far more on resilience than mitigation. I'm not trained in mitigation, and of course, little knowledge is always dangerous. So I'm not going to touch that space. So let me just, there are several challenges, as you know. The mother of all the challenges today is climate change, as they say. The population growth, poverty, urbanization, globalization. Of course, all are interlinked. But somewhat I'm a bit discomforted with the fact that the debate on population is quite muted today in India. Maybe in the 70s and 80s, so much of effort has been put on by the government. And given the fact that we are kind of superseding China, the population certainly is a huge problem, is an issue to be examined. And the nexus between climate change and population is so huge that we can't just ignore that. Somehow, it should come to the center of the debate today, and hope the days to come we will have certainly that as one of the priority areas for our discussions. And enough has been said about it. We have seen time and again the kind of reports which have been produced by IPCC and reiterating the fact that anthropogenic pressures are so much, and climate change is a factor of that. And science is also advancing, we should know, important, and the challenges are also advancing equally. And that's the problem. We are not going at that pace. As you know, recently the synthesis report was released a couple of days back, and some of the key takeaways from that report is here. Very clear that it's all human-induced. The evidence is far more today than ever, and climate impacts both the social system and physical systems in many ways. The interlinkages have to be really looked at. This is not a question of either-or story. It's important to kind of look it together, the impacts on the ecosystem as well as human, and how, if they are interlinked, and how they are mutually impacting each other is certainly a question. That's where the resilience and adaptation comes into play. Resilience is something it is all about our lives and livelihoods. It's embedded in development. To me, the climate resilient development is nothing but, development despite climate change. That's an important thing to be really thought about. How do you kind of organize your, be it technology or capacities, whatever it is, we should factor in those aspects. Some climate impacts are already so severe, they cannot be adapted to, meaning some of them are maladaptation as well. Today's adaptation becomes maladaptation in a few years. This is a moving target, as you know. It's because that's where the continuous information loop is important. Kind of, feedback system should be there to kind of fine-tune our measures so that we bring the right adaptation strategies for the right context. That is important. So these are some of the important things, and Professor Jayaraman talked about the inequities. That is certainly an issue. The gaps are going to be larger and larger if you are not focusing attention to that, the people, the downtrodden and the vulnerable communities. Those messages came very clear out in this synthesis report. I just want to kind of give a feel of what it means between 1 degree and 2 degree centigrade, 1.5 degree and 2 degree centigrade differences. It might be 0.5 degrees difference, but see the kind of impact it has on the ecosystems, particularly in the select systems, what we talk about. See here. Just a minute. Is it possible to kind of, somebody help me out in this one, this, the screen, full screen I need. So that I could read that. Can you? Maybe this is even better, I guess. You can. Okay, repeat it. Zoom it a bit. Okay. And see that, that's okay. This is just to show you the kind of impacts it has, how many folds, though it is a 0.5 degree, some of the systems like coral reefs are completely wiped out, So I think it is important, this information is very, very important, looking at the context in which we operate, the kind of impact, what climate change is inflicting on different systems. So just to give an idea of that, this is WRI's own work. So one thing about climate change, the only certain thing about climate change is uncertainty, as they say. There are questions about how, when, where, which kind of people, are affected, which countries, economies. These are some basic questions which still we're struggling to find an answer. Here and there we have certain answers, but still, it's a long way to go. How prepared are we to handle the unknowns? That's a big question. And how businesses could contribute to the solutions. They are part of the problems as well, so they have a duty to kind of provide solutions as well. So these are some of the contexts in which we have to really look at climate change. So again, this is basic statistics, as you know, now how much of, we have the 1/6 of the world's population and 2% of we own 2% of the world mass, land mass, as you know, world's land mass. And almost 60% of our land is vulnerable to earthquakes and 28% to droughts and all this. This is basic statistics, as you know. The message is very clear. We've been impacted periodically. There are evidences far more today. Every day we wake up to see something or other on climate change reported. Another important thing, the vulnerability is also because of the long coastal line what we have, about 7,500 kilometers of coastal line India has. And the density of population in these areas, as you know, Chennai is a living example, is far more. So these are some of the very specific impacts because this, I strictly go by the guidelines what provided by Dr. Venkatachalam. That's the reason I just organized my my slides based on that inputs what he has given. But anyhow, there looks like there is some liberty there, but I would strictly follow that. I hope it's okay. Fewer rainy days, but more days of extreme rainfall events. Actually, Chennai has witnessed that, as you know. We are all living here. We know that both intensity and frequency of rainfall has gone up. And the microclimate change is also, I live in the IIT campus. I see sometimes it rains here. When you come out, it's completely a different scenario. It happens sometimes, but it is more frequently it's happening. I could see that. So there is change in microclimates. So I just want to touch on two things. Agriculture and water are critical elements for us and important sectors for us. There are different numbers floating around, how the impacts the basic cereal crops like wheat, rice, and other things. But I'm not going into the numbers. But the bottom line is that it is impacted. The productivity might come down definitely, despite all the kind of technologies what we have. We have to live with that fact. So water is another important area. Both the quality and quantity of water has been impacted in a big way. There's enough has been said about it. We've been reading about it so much, particularly in coastal areas. The inundations and the salinization is a huge problem today. So how do we kind of handle that? So all these things, are also leading to the exaggeration of inequality. Provided we don't handle it. Adaptation is also a set of very context-specific, locally driven process, as you know. So there is going to be one solution to handle this. That's why the knowledge of the people becomes very, very important. The entry points are very important. So another important sector is the MSMEs. This has not been talked much about. Post to 2015, what Tamil Nadu witnessed, particularly Chennai, the MSMEs scenario is very, very bad. Many of them has closed shops, and they could not come back to the business. And after that, again, post-COVID also know the status of it, how the migrant laborers, the workers, how they've been subjected to so much of misery and other things. So I think MSME certainly deserves more attention, and particularly an industrialized state like Tamil Nadu, because our almost 30% of India's GDP employs 110 comes out of MSME. And 110 million workers been involved, and has about 48% share in export. So that is a huge sector in terms of, particularly these MSME sectors are also dependent on their parent companies, many of them, like Hyundai and particularly the automobile industries, as you know. So, unless they provide them the kind of, wherewithal and the financial resources and the capacities to manage, it's going to be a big question. And the economy will be certainly hit in a very big way. And the resilience of the MSME sector have to be improved. That's certainly because the lack of skill sets as we move along, people should understand they should be far more resilient. In order to be far more resilient, they need to have certain capacities, certain financial resources to manage those things, the technologies and stuff, which is not there. Particularly this is an important sector in the context of just transition as well, which has been much talked about today. Certainly the reskilling, retooling of those employees are very important. So I'm not going to touch this, as you all know what climate resilient development is. Jayaraman also spoke a little bit about it, and there are great connections between development and resilient development. We need to see development, despite climate change, becomes a resilient development. The choices we make are very, very important. How do we kind of, that is why the local knowledge becomes very, very important. The kind of geography we operate provides that kind of understanding of the kind of resilience measures what you have to take. That has to be factored in. So some of the other guidelines what he gave is about measures in place and progress made today in the Indian context. We have the classical National Action Plan on Climate Change, which came out in 2009, followed by State Action Plans on Climate Change. Then, there's been a mandate there, but what progress it has made is a big question. That's where, because of the fact that it has not been really monitored well, or the financial resources are not provided to the state governments. So I think it is very important to focus on not only at the national level, it is also important to look at the sub-national level activities for climate change. To make any difference, I think it is important to kind of sensitize the state governments and the local governments to a large extent, which is certainly a missing link here. And the government also announced the National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change. With about 4 or 5 years, it performed well, but it again, they have not replenished that money. So there is a dearth of funding there, and also particularly WRI focuses on this, working with the state governments. The 5 states we are working with the governments to kind of mainstream the adaptation actions into policies and processes. And Tamil Nadu has certainly been very thickly involved with the Department of Environment in many ways, providing them technical support, be it capacity building or providing them some language to the policy. Gamut of activities been involved in. And state action, as I mentioned, the NFACC, National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change, is very, very limited to the kind of tune of money what is in demand. Whatever has been provided is very, very limited. So I don't think 25 crores a state is something which is nothing. And of course, we also should think innovatively to use MNREGS as a vehicle to implement climate actions, particularly the resilience actions, because there are enough ways to kind of use that as a vehicle. As you know, it's mostly focused on rural development, roads, forestry. Those kind of activities are typically the MNREGS activities. So it has lots of relevance to how do you kind of use that, leverage that activity to use the labor force in terms of building resilient economies and resilient rural areas. And RE has been much talked about. Energy, certainly the big focus is on renewable energy, as you know. The government is giving lots of thrust in that area. I'm not going to elaborate that, but certainly it is an important area where we have made some progress, but we're not asked to really see how it progresses in the coming decades as well. And NDCs, again, NDCs is whatever we have come out with the national determined contributions. Is more of a, at that point in time, we are pressurized to come out with that during the Paris Accord. And there's a back of an envelope calculations what we made. It is not a exercise which I've undertaken at the country level to understand the seriousness of it and come out with the real numbers to put a realistic figure there. But NDC certainly, and state government doesn't have any kind of role in that. In many sense, it is not mandated, in other words, to the state government to kind of carry forward the NDCs. So, and there is also enough thrust today on the climate resilient infrastructure development and the climate proofing of whatever the infrastructure what we have. And one of the advantages of developing late or urbanizing late is the advantage what you see, and take advantage of those technologies and other things what other countries have and tailor-make to our own needs. In agricultural research, we have made great progress in that area. Still a long way to go, particularly in terms of coming out with genes for the warming world, as Prof. Swaminathan puts it. Always, it's the research has to be really fine-tuned to the needs of the time. And life is another thing. Lifestyles for environment is another area. But this is again, a lot of things are lip service, and you have to really see what is doable. Instead of spreading it thin, it is important to focus on certain areas, certain sectors, which means to our economies, and fine-tune them and come out with strategies which could really provide good outcomes. What are the additional measures? To me, most of them are governance questions. It's more of a, when technology is available today and we are capable of coming out with our own technologies, there are no dearth of policy measures in this country. It is more about the implementation of that and the regulatory frameworks. How serious are we about to kind of implementing those things is a big question. And there are lots of fragmented efforts across the governments and other agencies. So I think coordination becomes a big question. Wherever we worked, we have found that the agriculture people don't talk to water in terms of coming out with a strategy for climate change. Though there are every state has its own nodal agencies, the communication level is very, very at the communication level it is very poor, and the coordination is also poor. The information has not been shared periodically, which is a very critical component to come out with good resilience measures. And the sector-wise vulnerability assessment, there are different ways of doing vulnerability assessment. There is no one kind of a blueprint for that. So that we have to kind of somewhat standardize that to bring a better understanding. And science is also advancing, but in terms of generating the information at the cadastral level. But that's very, very important. And data, of course, there are deficits in data, as you know. The quality of data as well as access to data is also an important area where we have to have some improvements. And monitoring capabilities, as I mentioned, for planning process and adaptation, we need to have this kind of a loop, because adaptation is a moving target. It is important to have the right information at the right time to kind of, devise our own strategies, policies, etc. And research on low-cost technologies, appropriate technologies, that is also critical. And this country has been an example for many years, particularly the participatory technology development in agriculture has yielded good results. And I think we should really, because there is a rich knowledge there with the farmers, with the communities. How do you harness them to better effect is a big question. So I think nothing could be, completely some alien technology we can't bring in and introduce just because it has been there in the Western world. So I think we should tailor make those things to our needs. That's why the entry points are very, very important. And targeted financial allocations and performance-based budgeting. These are some of the areas where I see the gaps. And certainly we could improve more on that front. And emerging areas, food security and rural livelihoods, certainly, because as I mentioned, resilience is all about lives and livelihoods, saving lives and livelihoods. So I think there is I think we should have some concerted effort given our own population. It's important for us to be concerned of the fact of the impacts it has on food security. And cities, again, India is one of the rapidly urbanizing countries in the world. I think there are plenty of plethora of problems there in cities. There are different solutions which have come out, EVs and other things. But what is a good fit? One has to understand. Climate finance, of course, it's an eternal debate we have about climate finance. Who builds the cat and whose purse values we value. Those kind of questions are always there. And the onus is also on the developed countries to provide finance. But then access to finance. One thing is about the access to finance. Also, we need to have the capabilities. For example, GCF and adaptation funds. They are there, but we need to have it is a very cumbersome process, as you know, and one has to have the understanding of that. Even to develop a proposal, some level of technical knowledge has to be there. That is not there with the government today. So that is also an important area where we could concentrate on. And preventing disasters, we are doing well in that front. I feel, still, it's a long way to go, but at least there are good examples in terms of the early warning systems. What you have seen in Orissa and other places. Despite all those things, we have really made some good progress in that. At least the lives are not lost like what it used to be some 2 decades ago. And nature-based solutions is another thing which has been talked about much. I'll come back to that a little later. And locally led adaptation. I kind of elaborate this a little bit as we go along. Some of the kind of actions in each of those sectors. I'm not going to dwell deeper into that. One simple thing is $1 what we invest today, we yield about $17 is something. The Global Commission Adaptation kind of worked out that in 5 years' time, 2030, it'll kind of yield us about $17, which might be an important thing to consider because the more we delay, more the money we need to build resilience. So just transitions I talked about, this is a lifelong learning process. As long as the climate change is there, we need to kind of equip ourselves as we move on the trajectory. So local skills are important. Building those local skills, it ties up to the employment issue. Certainly, we should reskill and retool the people who've been engaged in particularly in the MSME sectors, so that the social protection measures are also put in place so that they don't suffer much. So I've talked about this already. So NBS, again, there are, particularly for a city like Tamil Nadu, Chennai, it is very, very important. We've been, the mangroves, we're fortunately endowed with good mangrove system. And what we've seen post-tsunami is how these bioshields have helped us in terms of saving lives and stuff. It's one of the, wherever the mangroves are dense and, they've been protected, the lives are saved. So we need to invest in those. Again, I'm not completely want to promote NBS. We need to have a good mix of the built infrastructure and NBS, because NBS mostly it's all about vegetation and other things. It has a long gestation period, so it is not easy to kind of to have this bioshields done in a week's time, or which we could give us some good outcomes in a year or two. It takes a longer time to develop this forests and stuff. So I think even parks for that matter, depending on where you walk, what kind of geography you're working in, we have to design this accordingly. And also we can't just jump to this right away. It is important to kind of work along with the built infrastructure. Climate finance, I talked about it enough. There are existing models today, particularly the UNCDF at the local government level. What could be done? For example, UNCDF, the United Nations Climate Development Fund, provides top-up money. And there are typical development projects taken up by World Bank and ADBs and other things. But then they only provide roads and stuff. The climate proofing part of it has been done by UNCDF. If only the local governments are interested in it and they have a certain way of, that's why they need to understand their perspective to kind of come out with their own adaptation strategies and ask for it. This is a project called Locale, which talks about this, and they've done well in few countries. They've pilot tested this in 5 countries in Asia and Southeast Asia, as well as in Africa. There are certain good lessons to be learned out of that. And as far as climate finance is concerned, we don't even know what to ask. That's the most of the thing. The problem lies there. We've been working in 3 or 4 states, Madhya Pradesh, to kind of come out with a resource mobilization strategy for the state action plan on climate change. So we need to understand the landscape of finance which is available today, be it public finance, private finance, CSR money, whatever it is. That kind of stock taking has not happened. So only then you'll understand what the needs are. And also, as you know, in all the, governments, the environment is one of the weakest link, department is the weakest link. So, fortunately in Tamil Nadu, a lot of things are going on today. The climate mission, they've come out with a climate mission, greening mission, and then the wetland mission. There are a bunch of activities. And also they created a Tamil Nadu Green Climate Fund, which is which has been created under a special purpose vehicle, which is certainly a role model. And also they have allocated about 1,500 crores for the Green Climate Fund. They created and also about 500 crores last budget they've allocated for climate mission. Now it has increased to about 1,248 crores in this budget. These are some of the models, and this is the way to go. Even 50% of it works, still we are in a win-win situation. So I think at the sub-national level, a lot has to be done in terms of mainstreaming. Okay, and then 10 key solutions. These are all. There's no rocket science. You get this everywhere. It's health, all the sectors has been addressed. So only thing is, what I want to reiterate is you should understand people's perspectives, because the people at the local level, they are living in proximity with the information what they generate. They understand things better. And that perspective certainly has a lot of value in designing any solutions. That factor cannot be ignored in any way. As, for example, this carbon removal approaches, there are different kinds of approaches. And what is a good fit from geoengineering measures to whatnot. You have so many measures, but we have to pick the right choice which fits the place. So I'm going back to the local level mainstreaming climate actions are important. Dr. Krishnamurthy has also highlighted that importance of that kind of index and stuff. These are very, very important to come out with any good solutions or good strategies at the local level. So WRI, along with its partners, came out with locally led adaptation principles that has been released in 2 years back. There are certain principles. They're pilot testing it across there are no compromise zones in terms of, which is embedded in the processes, whatever we execute in terms of eliciting information or designing policies and stuff. So this is a Community-based adaptation, I needn't talk much about it, because that knowledge again is very, very critical. So I'll stop here. This is something, the way forward is, evidence-based research, investment in scientific research. Of late, you see the core scientific research is, the investments on core scientific research is coming down, has come down drastically. And at least this budget is kind of, you see some kind of positiveness in this particular budget. But the past few years, it has been really not being much of money invested for scientific research. And systems-based transformative approaches. Transformation means different things to different people. It might be simply scaling up for certain people, or completely designing a new crop for a new system of, because given the climate factors, taking into consideration the climate factors, there might be completely new crops which we need to grow in certain areas. So are we prepared for that? How does the research inform us about that? And as I mentioned, the monitoring system is very, very important. Whatever we do, that monitoring system will help us to kind of fine-tune our activities. And best practices. Again, there is not a repository of kind of best practices. There are in certain sectors we have, but they might be outdated. So it is important for us to kind of document them very rigorously, methodically too. And access to climate information, I think we're doing well. Particularly few states in the country are really doing well in that. But how this information is being utilized is another question. The buck doesn't stop in delivering that information. We should also know how this information is used and to what impact it has made. That information is not there currently. And harness the power of youth. That is very, very important. I think lots of innovative ideas are generated in colleges and schools and stuff. How do we kind of have this access to this knowledge? I was part of a jury in one of the startups last week. It was very, very interesting. It's the first of a kind of my experience. But then, it is really eye-opening in terms of the people's ideas in waste management. There is a very interesting notion of bio-jewelry. I've never heard about this, bio-jewelry. How do you use bio-resources to make jewelries and stuff? So there are the ideas that there's no dearth of knowledge. How do we kind of channelize that and bring them to the fore and try to understand and apply them in different contexts? I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nambi. Questions? Clarificatory questions? Okay, thank you. Then now I would like to invite Professor Kavi Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Venkat, and also RBI for having me here. It's a pleasure to be back at MIDS always. Dr. Jayaraman cautioned us that we should not agree too much, but I tend to I'm kind of inclined to agree on the last principle that he mentioned, that development is the first line of defense for climate change. Though I slightly deviate from that a bit. We're connecting everything and anything that we see around right now to climate change. Probably we should be cautioning ourselves. We should not be undermining what we are doing to ourselves through our mal-development also. And I think that's only slight difference I would make. And the 2015 floods that we kept talking about since morning is a case in point here. As much as it is a naturally occurred event and once in a century kind of an event, it was also largely a result of our own mismanagement of our own resources. So a large role is also simultaneously to be attributed to the way in which we are managing our own activities. My own, as Dr. Venkat has in the introduction mentioned that I have been working in the climate change for too long, I think. Yes, I have been working, and probably I kind of deviated just an opposite of what Dr. Venkat went through. I was so much into climate, now I'm quite away from climate probably. I'm more into developmental issues, realizing that climate is, of course, one of the aspects that we should be focusing on. Development is a lot more important and priority. With those initial remarks, let me just focus a little bit on, after obviously previous speakers, a large ground has been covered. I'll be just focusing on two aspects particularly. One is on a little bit of impact on agriculture, the way we understand today and what we don't understand at the same time, and also the impact on economy, what we again understand and what we don't understand. And I'll connect with what we should not be doing probably. I don't know what we should be doing, definitely. It's a larger menu. So at least we should be knowing what we should not be doing, and probably those are the aspects I will try to focus on. And these are, just to reiterate, some of the maps. You don't need to read them, but just an idea is what I'm trying to convey there. Chairperson in the morning was mentioning about inequity in the system. To just highlight that point, I'm reiterating through this map here. This is the work that came up in PNAS 2019, which basically the top two maps show actually, as we talk about climate change, in the last few years or last few decades, how much warming has already happened, and that warming to what extent has helped the so-called developed countries. So there is a natural injustice, as we all understand, within the climate change impacts, and the countries which are currently cooler are likely to be better off under the climate change condition, and that's what is highlighted through the top two maps there. The upper latitude countries have benefited already to some extent from the already happened warming or change in climatic condition, and the bottom two are actually going to are talking about how much disadvantage the low latitude countries are going to be with the changing climatic conditions in future. So we have two sides we are affected badly. One is that those who have contributed more to the climate change problem are enjoying the fruits of so-called fruits of climate change, and those who are likely to be contributing less will have more adverse impacts, as has been highlighted by Dr. Nambi and several others in terms of the high vulnerability of these low latitude countries. This is nothing new, but just reiterated through more rigorous research. What we have anecdotally being talked about is established more rigorously through empirical research. Now, with regard to the climate change and food security, we don't know too much about climate, crop, soil, water nexus. We know each and everything in bits and pieces, but not combined status. Similarly, we don't have enough knowledge about how climate change could affect the animal and livestock productivity, to what extent those will, in terms of the negative consequences, they would have on the livelihoods and migration. Again, we know it's almost like an elephant and blind man. Research is always like that. We keep looking at one side of the picture and try to understand what it is trying to convey, but equally important is what we are not actually covering. Also equally important is heat stress and labor productivity. Very little has been understood in this field because particularly activities like agriculture are highly exposed to the natural conditions, and in extreme heat conditions that we are talking about under climate change, to what extent productivity, labor productivity itself would change, and through which how morbidity and mortality could manifest, and change in labor productivity, how it is going to affect the agricultural yields, and as a result, food security aspects, we have very little understanding. There is some work in the manufacturing sector on the heat stress and labor productivity. I'll highlight that a little later, but especially in the context of the exposed sectors such as agriculture, construction, we have very little knowledge. We could also have conflicts resulting from climate change, and that could lead to food insecurity aspects. This has also been less understood or less studied. We need more understanding on that. Again, I'm just kind of highlighting what we don't know. We know quite a bit, as has been highlighted, but these are things we don't know much about. Just again, a big graph. You don't need to read all of that. I just wanted to highlight few aspects. I am taking this example from this recent work from Cords et al., Nature 2022, wherein they looked at precipitation and impacts on agriculture, economic growth, and precipitation generally is understood as a primary variable of, let's say, mean annual precipitation change, which is what is shown in the A graph there, the extreme left graph, which actually, as you expect, more the precipitation, good it is, and so on, but necessarily higher rainfall, the benefit starts diminishing as rainfall keeps increasing. That's simply the mean value. But the second graph is also talking about how if you deviate from the normal, the negative deviations are more harmful. Basically, a concave response function that you're seeing there is a very important point to keep in mind, that not every deviation is necessarily good. The last two are essentially talking about other ways of capturing precipitation, which are like extreme wet days. Wet days in general, the frequency of wet days increasing, as well as intensity of that wet days increasing. These are very less understood. We don't have much knowledge on these aspects in the agricultural impact assessments. We typically involve temperature impacts. This is a global exercise. This is a global exercise. I'm coming to India specific a bit. So again, my emphasis is to point out that we usually model with primary climate variables like max temperature, minimum temperature, annual mean rainfall, and standard deviation of the rainfall. These are okay, but they need to be enhanced. We need more than those as what we call as derived variables, and those are important in variety of sectors. For instance, if I want to look at milk production, none of these variables would be relevant. What would be relevant is more like combination of temperature and humidity. That would be more relevant, and that would be appropriate variable to be used for understanding the milk productivity and changing climatic conditions. So we are trying to kind of make it a uniform methodology for most of the exercises. Probably that won't suffice, is all that I'm trying to highlight here. This is some of our own work where we try to look at how economic growth, as it is understood in our GDP per capita growth and so on, how that is going to be affected by changing temperature conditions, or especially max temperature changing. And I'm showing here for so-called poor versus rich states, as well as cooler versus hotter states. As the left panel shows poor versus rich, the middle line is the blue line that you're seeing is essentially the mean estimated, and with the band around it is 95% confidence interval. As you could see, simply the poorer states, for an increment or increase in the temperature, are likely to witness much sharper drop in their growth rates as against the richer states. That's a worrying feature. Exactly same thing is replicated when you look at cooler versus hotter states. The hotter you are, further heat or further temperature increase is going to make your growth rates drop much more sharply. This is something globally also known, which has been kind of, we are reiterated through our own work in Indian context to show that temperature changes could be having significantly higher impacts on growth rates, and as a result, that is something not good for the future. Now, we also looked at, we have enough evidence on some of these indirect impacts, such as migration, farmer suicide, which people like Dr. Jayaraman would very much oppose, but let me put it there for the sake of, because the literature exists. And fair enough, thank you. But we actually looked at how migrations could be affected by the changing climatic conditions, induced through the agricultural productivity changes. And that's what we observe is that in Indian context, as such, migration is not sufficiently high. Compared to the developed countries, the way in which the developed countries' migrations have happened, we have under-migrated. We are largely still rural economy. We have not let these people move away from rural areas and rural livelihood options to more urbanized livelihood options. And this is artificially we have kept them there. And that is what is reflected to the past data from the, when we try to assess or model the impact of changing climatic conditions on migration patterns. We see the elasticity to be low, but that's a reflection of our past. but that need to be changing. Probably we would be expecting a much sharper jump in the rural-urban migration. We also see sufficient evidence that there could be more of rural-rural migration, people searching for livelihoods from one area to another area because this place is bad, so let me look for another place. And it could be quite a pretty dismal scenario in that sense, people searching for various livelihood options across the country in the rural, which itself could be witnessing, on the whole, much larger adverse impacts. We also have, as I said, some evidence on suicides. This work by Carleton in 2017 in PNAS attracted a lot of media attention, wherein she has estimated that over the last 30 years, India could have caused around close to 60,000 suicides, largely because of the agricultural distress without explicitly capturing the agricultural distress. We re-estimated all that with a lot more careful attention to the data. One of our own master students has worked with us on establishing this. What we show now is that 1 degree raise in temperature results in higher farmer suicides of almost close to 5%, precipitated by 3.6% decline in the agricultural productivity, and that's the key there. We established especially why that decline in, increase in farmer suicide could take place. But we also highlight a number of other factors that could be leading to this, including contagion effect, and that's a very important dimension in the psychology research to be looking at. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight some of those existing evidences and what I also said, what we don't know enough about in the beginning. What we could be asking ourselves as far as the questions are concerned, are we measuring the impacts based on the observed weather and climate? We are using the past data to do the impact calculations, but are there reasonable predictors of the future climate change impacts? Our own claim is that, our own argument is that these methodologies don't suffice us. These are going to be depending on past data, and past data has intrinsic historic features in them embedded in it. So you need different tools and different methodologies to take the estimates to the future. And that is also relevant in the loss and damage context. Not much has been mentioned about loss and damage by the previous speakers, but we also know that in the climate change context, there is a new or a third pillar of negotiation, which is in addition to the mitigation and adaptation that's emerging, which is on the dimension of loss and damage, which is basically to look at already happening losses and damages due to meteorologically induced events and so on. So all that requires us to look at different toolkits. Probably we don't have enough knowledge on those things. I just wanted to highlight through the table below there. For instance, if you're using long-term impact calculations using statistical methods, like many of you could be familiar with, like econometric specifications of the kind that we often employ, there is scope for a lot of adaptation that is inbuilt in it. So there is such kind of techniques will capture adaptation appropriately. But for estimational accuracies, we depend on more fine-scale data, like a panel data, which would automatically take away some scope for adaptation. And both these kind of approaches, I'm just deviating a little bit since there are a number of students here. I thought I'd also mention about the underlying methodological issues. The price changes are invariably ignored in these kind of exercises, largely because there is a relative prices remaining constant kind of an argument. But if you want to look at this loss and damage kind of estimations where more event-specific impact calculations are needed, price changes matter a lot. And you will need a lot more emphasis on price impacts to capture your overall impacts and so on. Anyway, so just to highlight that these are issues to be kept in mind while these impact calculations are made. We do have some information on the distributional issues, first of its kind in the using price effects. Gupta and her colleagues in 2021 have estimated that if you do capture the price effects, welfare losses to the landless poor are 6 times greater than the first order impacts, which are without the price effects, like only using GDP level impacts. So the impacts with the price effects always are likely to be much higher. There is another recent work by Kumar and Khanna, 2023, wherein they look at the effects of weather and climate are asymmetric in the sense that effects being larger on the lower tail of the productivity distribution and smaller at the upper tail. That's a very disturbing feature, something that we should be worried about, because there is going to be distributional issues geographically, then the distributional issues on the economic productivity levels and on the economic and also in terms of the economic classes, as I mentioned from the Gupta et al. Study. As I said, the heat-induced labor productivity impacts, and as a result, the food security aspects need a very rigorous understanding, because we're just assuming that farmers are continuing to go to the field and continue to work no matter how hot it is, and it's not likely to be the case. Eventually, that would be it could become quite difficult for them to work on, and that would lead to quite a decline, or quite a substantial decline in the agricultural output, and as a result lead to productivity issues. So let me just take a detour to look at few things that we are not doing correctly. As I said, I want to also take a stock of what we are not doing correctly, not necessarily in the context of climate change, but in the general context of environment and sustainable development. This is well known, probably many of you would have seen this map from 2020 by CSC's researchers. We are actually, over the period of 2014 to 2020, 2,000 project proposals have been approved, out of which 228 proposals were in and around protected areas, what we call as protected areas. And many of them within the eco-sensitive zone of those protected areas. So we are in a great hurry to develop, but at what cost are we developing? That we are not necessarily asking ourselves. And our processes we are diluting significantly. Example of that is given in the bottom part of the slide there. Environmental clearance process, which is as per Office Memorandum 2022 that was released from the Ministry of Environment and Forest, has created, or actually is talking about a ranking system to states in terms of their speed of clearance of projects. Just to give some of the criteria based on which the rankings are going to be given. If this, as you may be knowing, most states have the so-called environment clearance authorities, which will take up all projects beyond certain size to be looked at. These could be simply industrial activities, construction activities, mining activities, all that. So all these activities need clearances from the statutory authority. Now we are trying to simplify that process. Good, we should be simplifying, because there could be red tape there. We should be simplifying all that. But is it in the right direction? That's the question I'm asking. For instance, we have things like, if you have less number of field visits, the competent authorities are supposed to go to the fields to observe whether the proposed project is in the right space, right, without encroaching upon protected areas and so on and so forth. So if you do less of that, more marks are being given to the states. So which sounds kind of paradoxical, like are we really doing the right thing is the question that I'm posing there. This is not a pinpointed attack on environment clearance process, but just to highlight that this is the speed and this is the enthusiasm with which we are moving to quote-unquote develop ourselves, but that development could be more counterproductive than what we are hoping it would be. I cannot help but show an example from my own area where I live. This is the condition of the road where I live. I'm not in the completely remote areas of this city. I'm in a place very close to a number of IT parks. The leftmost graph is photo is that was taken in 2021 when the things were okay. But then 2022, with our wisdom, we wanted to develop some underground sewage pipelines and all. 1 year, we are still doing that work. We're still doing that work for 1 year. I'm sure many of you in this hall, outside this hall, face exactly similar situation. This is what I'm calling as development deficit. We have extremely high level of development deficit. I also want to kind of add to that, we also have adaptation deficit. So we do things at our own pace. We can, of course, in the beginning of my intervention, I started talking about there is an inequity in the climate change from the between developed and developing countries, but we are also precipitating it by our own activities, our own ways of doing things. So climate change is not going to wait for our own inefficiencies. It is going to hurt us more if you are inefficient. We better be talking about, we should be doing things better than what we are doing. And this is not just to highlight and ask for intervention in my area, but I just wanted to show that there is a problem everywhere. We see it across the board, across the country, pace of doing things, haphazard way of doing things. And it's like, when you're talking about climate change impacts, I often say that the impacts are going to be exaggerated if you have very untidy situation, which is what like? Think of a workshop where you're working, and if it is entirely untidy, then your escape path or your ways to protect yourself will reduce or diminish significantly. It's exactly where we are. Most of our problems probably need to be addressed from that angle. Of course, climate change comes on top of it, but we should be then well prepared, which is exactly goes back to what Dr. Jayaraman has mentioned. Development in the right way is the mantra that I would like to leave with. These are some more things I would like to just leave for anybody to look at. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kavi. Yeah.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Just 1 minute, sir. Is that okay? Yeah, thanks. Please go.
Mike.
Very much affected due to climate change as compared to poorer countries. What is the way forward for making our country, which is hottest among compared to other countries, to be more cooler? In the sense, during lockout period, you might have observed all development activities came to standstill, and nothing was functioning for about 1.5 years. Whether it made a substantial impact of improving the climate change to make our life more cooler. Is there any study has been conducted?
Well, I think there are 2-3 things we should be cautioning ourselves about. One is climate change is a more generic feature that we are using here. I hope you're not meaning it, but let me highlight that aspect. What you are referring to is a microclimate, and which could be because of activities that are happening in and around it. But what we are discussing in today's deliberations is more about global climate change, which would be resulting from anthropogenic emissions like greenhouse gases and so on, which can be moderated to some extent through your micro interventions, but not completely eliminated. So there is no notion of eliminating climate change through entirely your micro interventions. Yes, you can increase your tree cover, you can increase your reduce your economic activities to the extent possible to make the local conditions more amenable, but that is not to talk about change or altering or reversal of climate change. I hope I'm clear on that, and I think that's important principle to keep in mind. To specific to your question, yes, we can do a lot more at microclimate level, but that is nothing to do with the climate prevention or climate change prevention. Climate change is likely to happen anyway, whether we do all this or not. You can make your life a little more comfortable, that's all.
Sorry, 1 minute. I would like to request the panelists to get back.
I am Dr. Shanti, medical doctor. the gynecologist, and we have a forum called All India Progressive Forum also. We work on environment. Recently, we had a 3 days workshop, national level workshop at Nagpur for environment, and this topic is very good, and it is the whole session was very useful, and it is thought provoking. The topic is Indian economy and climate change issues and the way forward. And then being a medical doctor, and we are doing more work on the climate change and the health impact. That is going to affect our Indian economy in a very, very important way. And I thought it will be included also. And then with reference to, Sir said food security, and then heat stress was mentioned. And then the same thing, drought and other thing, and then sudden heavy rain. So waterborne diseases and drought affects how women, Sir, Dr. Jayaraman sir spoke very well about the labor work participation and the gender issues, which is very important. And our participation has come down from now it is 19, from 22 to 19, maybe because of this climate change also, because of the drought and other issues throughout the country, women are going to fetch water. And so they are not going to, girls are not going to school, women are not going to work. So because of that also the participation rate has come down. Already it is low. So the health aspect also should have been included. Otherwise, it is very good. Thank you. Would you like to work with MIDS?
Sure, most welcome. Yeah.
I am Prakash from Vivekananda College. Both Dr. Jayaraman and Kavi Kumar has rightly mentioned. So the need of the hour is sustainable infrastructure, not temporary infrastructure, and we keep on building and it adds on to pollution and so many things. We are witness to that in Chennai very much. So we need a sustainable infrastructure. We have a very good quality testing institutions where we should say, for example, we should have a road built for 20 years. Not for 6 months and 4 months, and again built. So we waste money on that. So as you rightly said, our Prime Minister, luckily, we got acceptance from the world community in large for 2070. So our development aspirations are really, and that should be sustainable quality. So that's rightly said. So otherwise, climate change is not a real issue for a country like India. I mean, our development aspirations are really important, and for which we need quality development, sustainable infrastructure. So that is very, very important. And of course, climate change. We should not be complacent that we got till 2070 zero emission standard. We should not be complacent, as Kavi Kumar said. At the same way, we have to move forward with climate resilient strategies. So this is really a thought-provoking session. Thank you.
In the context of what our friend was saying from Vivekananda College, be clear about one thing. There is no doubt that climate change is a threat. There is no doubt that 4/5 of the global carbon budget for 1.5 is exhausted. So the world as a whole, its emissions capability, what it can emit cumulatively, is well under pressure. Okay. First point to remember is it out of control? I believe it is not. For the following, it's simple arithmetic, but it works. If you take all the updated indices, this, that, and the other, and package them together, we get roughly 200 billion tons of CO2 emissions in this decade. Then if you get, hopefully, if we can do better in the next decade, we may do something like another 200 or a little less, and hopefully even lesser as we go along. That's a possibility. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's a way to look forward. So the whole thing will add up to about 600 gigatons, maybe 650. That's not too far away from the 500 gigatons, roughly speaking, which is the limit for 1.5. So climate change, dealing with climate change is within reach. When we emphasize about development, the point we are trying to make is, suppose you are building a bridge and your lifetime of a bridge is 70 years, then you better be worrying about climate change. I mean, this is not the thing. But tomorrow you want to build a PHC, primary health center, and you insist that your PHC must be powered only by solar power, then I think you have got your priorities upside down. PHCs are the first thing. You can retrofit them with solar power as and when necessary. These things can be done. But there is this whole thing about somehow whatever you do, you must build a climate change. That must be kept within control. And I completely agree with Dr. Kavi Kumar that, there are a lot of issues with regard to the development agenda. And everything is not related to climate. For women's workforce participation has been low in India historically. This is not something we started earlier. Where, in fact, in climate, like Dr. Kavi Kumar mentioned, and also Dr. Nambi also mentioned, where we have put attention on disaster management, we have managed to do well. It is not as if it's bad news. The heat wave action plans, which are promoted in some states, if those are implemented thoroughly, we can take care of mortality and other issues definitely. And how to reschedule work activity, economic activity during this period, if there is a societal conversation, then certainly we can make progress. So I think the argument is not about development versus climate mitigation, but the argument is to emphasize that the values that are important to development are the same values that are also important to underline climate mitigation and adaptation. And this idea somehow that equity, all that is not necessary. There is some emergency. We have some emergency lifeboat ethics we want to deal with. That's a very, very bad argument. So this is the point I think we should really underline. Thank you.
Yes, there.
Hello, sir. Very good afternoon. Thank you for the lovely session. I'm a research scholar at IIT Madras. I'm myself working on human mobility and climate change. I come from the state of Uttarakhand, where all of these incidences where we have talked about erratic rainfall and rainfall being more in intensity and glacial retreat, everything is happening. But the thing is that people hardly, when you talk about mobility to the common masses, they hardly recognize themselves to be climate migrants. They rather talk about other things. So, and also about the government data, where we go for census data or the migration data from the state governments, there's hardly, across India, hardly you will find anywhere where they specifically talk about climate migrants. They talk about migration in a broader sense. So what is your take on that? Yeah, it is to you.
No, I think the notion of climate migrants is largely confined in the international discourse, especially from low-lying islands being inundated and people needing to migrate from there to habitable places and so on. So within a country, I don't think the notion of climate migrants is as yet evolved. I don't think it is necessary also. If I were to think about it, I think we have enough broader clarification, broader understanding of the migration in the existing definitions. In fact, we are operating already with a very flawed definition in some cases. Like, for instance, census defines migrant as anybody who has born in one place, residing in another place, which means most of us are migrants. Because we would have born in some place and obviously migrated to another place. But still we are operating with all that. We don't need explicitly climate-specific migrants, because migrant per se will never be able to pinpointedly say that I have migrated because of these reasons. It's always a combination of reasons which will eventually make them take this drastic step. We are talking about migration for livelihoods, migration for economic opportunities and so on. So in that case, I think existing method of collecting data, if done properly and continuously, and unfortunately, we stopped doing that from NSS. We should be doing, and we should not be delaying our census migration data for almost a decade. We are still operating with 2011 census data for migration data. I don't know where we are living. I mean, that is my problem, not about explicitly starting one more kind of migration data collection and then messing it up with existing data. Let us build more systematically. That's more important.
Hello.
Yeah, I think Friends, I'm Uma Shankar from RBI. So it was really, first of all, congratulations to all the panelists. I think we had wonderful presentations made by all of you. Just a quick question to Professor Jayaraman, sir. You have brought out very nicely that we must not lose focus on development. And can we then, and at the same time, we have also heard from the other presenters how climate change, the adverse impact of climate change would eat into development, how it would reduce economic growth. So obviously we need to enmesh both of them. So is it possible to redefine the nationally defined contributions which have been announced by the government of India and subserve it to the main developmental goals? Say, achieve this. You said it's very unrealistic to reach those milestones, no doubt. But can we then, not to lose focus on developmental goals, can we then make it subservient to the developmental goals? I know we have the Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals, etc. But I think, are we not working at cross purposes? At one point, we are saying that we need to have zero hunger, zero malnutrition, but we are losing sight of that in the nationally defined contributions, number one. Number two, can we not take a leaf from the book of, say, China, which has gone way ahead in terms of solar energy? I was just reading, it's one of the highest in terms of solar energy creation. And at the same time, in terms of development also, they have done very well in terms of per capita income or welfare. By whatever measures we want to go towards holistic development, the Human Development Index also, I think China has done admirably well. So can we not take something from that and reorient ourselves in developing policies in that direction?
Thank you for your kind words. And how should I put it? Let me answer the second part first about China. This again speaks to my point that I've been trying to make, that the structural issues of the Indian economy will not go away because you are focusing on climate change. So there is, unfortunately, our friends in many think tanks in Delhi who say that dealing with climate change will solve all other problems also. But that, I think, goes against anything we have seen across the world. And that I don't think is the case. So, you know, this whole discourse about climate change as an opportunity. I mean, if you can produce some solar panels, well and good. But if all you are doing, opportunity means buying more solar panels and installing them in India, is okay, fine, but it's not that great an opportunity for development, you know. So this kind of issue is a problem. So my short answer is, dealing with climate change will not get rid of this problem. So I think we need to see we need to keep our eyes on the ball in terms of the fundamentals of development. And realize that, however, in technology, etc., different shifts may occur from what we might have anticipated 20 years ago. All that will be there, but we can't take our eyes off the ball on the basics in that respect. With regard to the first one, I think the emphasis on our NDCs currently is broadly correct. I think, that we have an emissions intensity of GDP parameter, and we have a parameter which speaks to efficiency, which is the hallmark of for developing countries to improve efficiency, energy efficiency and emissions efficiency in particular, as you are talking about efficiency. And even from my view, perspective of the carbon budget, I would argue that whatever carbon budget, part of the carbon budget we are able to access, using it more efficiently adds to our benefit. Except that we must be very careful about carbon trading, on which we are completely careless. I think we really are very careless on carbon trading, even in official circles. Some safeguards come in at the last moment, as is typical in Government of India. That, the minister saying at the last minute that it is not part of international carbon trading. That's a very important safeguard, even if we have a domestic carbon market. But carbon markets are very disequalizing. Why are we into carbon markets at such an early stage? Is this what we really need? Some trading of white certificates, energy certificate, efficiency certificates, yes, but why go farther? And how exactly will that maximize our use of our carbon budget, or what we should lay claim to of the global commons? So these are issues which will come up. And going forward, I think we need to, I spoke about this briefly, I alluded to it in the context of modeling, etc. India must make it clear that it is not only a carbon budget, but that is also a base level of primary energy use we expect to be part of our mix. Source-wise, we are open to discussion. But that we have a target of primary energy use, which is in comparison to correlating with other indicators, relevant to our use, relevant to our developmental targets. Some such benchmarks we need to evolve. So I think the global modeling framework which people are using is still does not answer the developmental needs adequately. And I personally have been very critical of it in the literature. So this is something going forward, and it is in this context that what NDCs or what indicators we will use will be up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Gentleman over there.
If I can just add one small point there. I think I completely agree with Dr. Jayaraman's point there about NDCs are right in the right place, but I think the prioritization of what is we seem to be giving too much importance to NDCs as against the Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals. I think that prioritization I would argue against. We should actually give more importance to the Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals, and probably put in our own pecking order the NDCs to be not so. They are important. What they are attempting to do is correct, but we're somehow kind of giving too much importance, as again also mentioned very lively point about why Parliament wants to discuss about the roadmap for net zero as against roadmap for malnutrition. Very pertinent point. I think that is the priority problem that we must be doing.
Hello.
First of all, I would like to thank MIDS for organizing this wonderful panel discussion with collaboration with the RBI, which will give lots of inputs to research scholar with giving the lot of research problem. My question is very general. First of all, if you're going to the focus on mainly on the Indian economy and climate change, do you think, sir, is climate change climate smart agriculture really smart in India? Do you think that means in the sense that government policies are mainly focuses on the income augmentation schemes, let's say the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Vikas Yojana and all, they are giving the income boost, but very less emphasis on the climate smart. But do you think first of the thing is that, and second of thing, if you focuses on the climate smart agriculture again in the crop diversification prospect, then whatever the traditional crops, then if you moving the, that means practicing the agricultural diversification to modern crops which is climate intensive, then what about the traditional crop which is going to be in future generation? And second, if you go to the manufacturing sector, sir told there is no that means climate and focusing on the environment will be the substitute for the economic growth. I don't think so because I have conducted one survey on particularly Indian manufacturing sector. Those who are doing, as you know, the Corporate Social Responsibility Act and the environmental regulation has evolved in India, the mandatory for the Indian manufacturing companies in 2013. I made after the mandatory of Corporate Social Responsibility Act, the Indian manufacturing sector, that means those who are mostly on the energy intensive sectors, they are performing better in the energy aspect. They are achieving the energy efficiency goal. That means they are in the win-win situation. Not like that they are doing the energy efficiency through the carbon goal, carbon achieving net zero. That does not mean they are sacrificing their economic goals. They are also achieving their economic productivity and all. Then what is the clarification in that regard, sir? Yes, first one? In general. Yeah.
First on the climate smart agriculture, I guess, we love phrases. We just keep loving phrases. Every second day we keep coining new ones. I just keep remembering our R.K. Lakshman and Common Man. He could be bewildered, just like the farmer just bewildered what the hell these guys are talking about. I'm already being smart. If I'm not smart, I would not have been there, first of all, right? I think we can only take the discourse to a little farther by coining these new phrases. Underlying fundamentals need to be correct. I think we need to be, what probably is missing in the earlier systems before we started worrying about climate change was the information dissemination was not as effective. Probably that we should be bridging. Knowledge dissemination we should be doing more aggressively and more effectively. Kisan Vigyan Kendras were there for a long time, but probably they were never reaching out to the farmer with the right information and so on. That with the digital technology or whatever may be the means at our disposal, we should try to do that. That much of smartness I can understand. Beyond that, let us leave the smartness to the agent there who will be in a better position to undertake activities appropriately. I don't think anybody either on this side or that side of this table know better than the farmers with regard to the actual farming activities are concerned. Only we can assist them by providing these additional informations appropriately. Thinking that we would be knowing more than them is incorrect in my view.
That's a very good question, and everybody is pondering over this. There is a lots of myth about CSA, as you know. It is a very complex kind of a notion, which has mitigation component, an adaptation component, and the sustainability component. It's I don't see one model which is delivered on all these three fronts, to my experience. And certainly, that's a difficult question, as Kavi very clearly said. Farmers are concerned about tomorrow, not even day after tomorrow. So if you make them understand that and provide them the wherewithals for tomorrow, then that's smartness. Within applying their own knowledge, basically, as you rightly said. There's so much there. that knowledge has to be leveraged to kind of manage climate risks in a way that's what smartness is about.
Actually, there was a second part to your question on high energy intensive industry and the fact that they seem to do better in terms of energy efficiency. I think this is not surprising because energy intensive industries, energy intensive by what measure is very important. If you think of the volume of energy, okay, or total quantum of energy, then a modern steel plant will consume a lot more energy than some small pig iron plant, okay, crude steel plant. But on the other hand, per unit of output, then the modern factories will produce, much less emissions compared to these other plants. So it also depends on what unit of output you are measuring. And in case, a very good example is, say, milk productivity. Emissions per unit of per liter of milk in India is quite high and is higher than developed countries. But on the other hand, on the flip side is the fact that it is very distributed livestock livestock rearing, and the herd size is between 1 and 2 animals. It provides employment, incomes, particularly to women across a huge number. So all that are societal trade-offs from simple efficiency considerations. Okay, so I agree with you that that's the real problem for India, because if you take urea, if you take power, many of these, the emissions intensity is at the frontier of what is technologically feasible. So, but it is for the backward sectors, for the sectors which have to catch up, that we need more carbon space and we need this flexibility. So this is the complexity of the efficiency question that we have to be careful about.
Can it be manifested to the scale of production? Are you referring to the scale of production here?
Which context are you referring to? This particular agriculture or
manufacturing, agriculture, in all the way, productivity. So are you referring to the scale of production in productivity?
No. When I think you're referring to the Kumar and Khanna's work, wherein we talked about the productivity distribution. The impacts are likely to be on the lower end of the productivity tail. Impacts are going to be more adverse than they are in the upper end of the tail. So that means essentially the ones who are less endowed, efficient wise and their own outcomes wise, when they're less, their impacts are going to be higher compared to those who are on the upper end. And that's a distributionally challenging worry. That's what we were trying to highlight.
Right, sir. So building upon this, you also showed one of the slides in which it is clearly shown that China, being 27% contributor to the global carbon emission, will comparatively relatively have low probability to economic damage and low percentage of change in climate as compared to India. So China has been following the methodology of being the world factory, the scale of production in that sense. So should India also transform its productivity in terms of scale? Should India focus more on manufacturing industries, curbing its influence, curbing its focus on MSME and focusing more on high-scale industries that have potential to generate more economic growth, which in turn can lead to more economic development?
Yeah. My colleague was saying if we knew the answer, why are we sitting here? That's a separate, lighter vein. But the point, I guess, is first and foremost, that graph that you're referring to is to deal with the historic changes in the already happened climate change, to what extent certain countries have benefited. The benefits would have driven from multiple channels. One of the main channels in the climate context is the cooler climatic conditions these countries are currently residing in, and once a change in climatic conditions facilitate more growing period and more productive activity and to be happening, they will gain. That's the point there. I think probably I lost explaining that effectively while displaying that. But from that you are building the second question, that can the scales be India also follow or mimic the path of China? Nothing stopped us. We have been doing that for the last 70 years. We have been emphasizing that we must be growing, our manufacturing should be growing. What happened? We didn't manage. We could, as Dr. Jayaraman was mentioning, several are seeing climate as a window to reiterate our old ambitions. We can reiterate. Nothing stops us again from that. But that is not a panacea per se. Given our socio-economic conditions, our cultural or whatever may be the conditions that we talk about which inhibited us to embark upon a large-scale manufacturing industrialization process, will continue to halt us. Halt us. They will not let us become industrialized the way China or somebody has become.
They will get in the way.
They will get in the way from the global forces, but our own, earlier also, people have not deliberately stopped us from progressing. We didn't progress. We didn't have the wherewithal to do that. I mean, you can argue that people has deliberately restricted our movement and globally forces have been there. Yeah, okay, anyway. Service, no, I guess the service sector argument is completely different.
Unless and until we capture more market outside, develop interdependencies on foreign countries, and have a collaborative approach in the international market as well, focusing on manufacturing industries is something that I think we need to rethink upon over service sector.
I'm not at all stopping us from rethinking. We can keep rethinking, but did we achieve is my question. Did we achieve what we wanted for the last 70 years? We didn't achieve. We should rethink about why we haven't achieved what we targeted ourselves. And that is what I'm saying, as our own intrinsic features, we cannot be probably overlooking and thinking that China progress, so I can also progress. I mean, you come from IIT, I know that you may be knowing that among every other sector, Indian government is also wanting to mimic on education sector as well. And one of the target, apparently, I'm told by my colleagues from IIT that we want to produce as many number of PhDs as China produces. Is it a competition for nonsense? I mean, I agree, that is where we are moving. Probably we need to be rethinking, even on the manufacturing. My answer is same.
Yes, sir.
I think I want to reframe it in a sense that I agree with Dr. Kavi Kumar on the following. Suddenly you cannot jump into, but China is doing this, There are a set of issues with Indian economic development. Its structural composition of the economy, the rate of change of various parameters that denote a healthy economy, the need to attain not minimum but respectable levels of human development where we need not be embarrassed by our statistics. This problem remains. Climate change or no climate change. What we are warning about is the fact, do not think by focusing on climate change automatically this will be solved. This is a thrust which is coming from outside and also sometimes by well-meaning or otherwise forces, which I think profoundly misstates the question. Okay? So the problems that we have with regard to managing the Indian economy will remain. To that has been added the problem of climate change mitigation and adaptation. After that, the debate is open. You have your views, I have mine, he has his, and it will continue, and we have to find our way forward. I also think it is not copying China, copying XYZ, which should be the issue. You had at any given time a set of resources, constraints, conditions under which you have to make progress, you have to produce material outcomes. What is the optimal way to produce maximal outcomes? That should be the debate. And I would rather get away from the China did this and Korea did that and Taiwan did this and so on and so on. Learn all you want. But eventually, it's your country and your model and your economy. This doesn't change. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Vandana, currently pursuing BA History and Tourism from Stella Maris College. First of all, thank you all the panelists for the wonderful sessions. My questions are towards Jayaraman sir. First question is, what are the possibilities of students to act in the climate change? And my second question is, many projects are implemented on the basis of sustainable development goals, but while implementing those things, it is only considering the economic aspects. So how can we fill the gap between the financial and the sustainable development? How can we fill that gap?
Second part I leave to Dr. Kavi Kumar, because he knows far more than me. This is not for me to comment upon. In general, I would say yes, climate change is a multidimensional issue, and students who are interested in this should engage with different aspects, and I hope institutions encourage students to do so and not get into siloed approaches. At the same time, I must say, sometimes disciplinary specialization is important, as you saw in Dr. Kavi Kumar's presentation. I mean, that is an economist speaking, and that says certain things which the rest of us don't capture. So this is very important. Regarding the first part about how students can, one thing, I'm going to be very frank about this. There is a feeling among a section of students that if you take certain headline catchy remarks, which everybody says, okay, then you are headed for a job in some quote-unquote well-paying agency. Okay, I've seen students parade before me on this. And it all comes from, I know where they come from. They come from the last report from X, there's some headline statement from Y. I have seen a respectable law school in its journal allow the publication of a paper which is simply cobbled together from the internet. Please think for yourself. You may be modest in your scale of work, but be critical and be original. This is also old advice. There's nothing new we are saying. But this is extremely important. And simply repeating popular buzzwords to go ahead, okay? Because whoever comes out with the buzzwords in the best organized fashion gets the prize. That's a very poor way to go. Let me give you a really sharp example. You saw in Dr. Nambi's presentation the scale of impacts between 1.5 and 2 degrees, that it will double, it will be 4 times. Many of these results come from single studies. Okay, they may have used databases, but it is a single study, and it is the 1.5 special report on global warming at 1.5 degrees of the IPCC has number of such results. Do they apply to India? These are global estimates. Do they apply to India? What is the data based on which we should look at it? For India, what is the difference between 1.5, 2 and 2.5? What are the data gaps in this? Nobody has analyzed this. So there is this huge work which has been done, some 6,000 to 8,000 papers outside about the difference between 1.5 and 2, we have done almost nothing for India. So students should look for gaps like this. And this is where you don't take things for granted. Ask, is it correct as it applies to India, as it applies to the monsoon, whatever it is. So I really think that you would have a more critical attitude. And if critical attitude was always important in academics, but it is even more so in the context of climate change. This is my frank suggestion to you. Thank you.
Just to add on to Dr. Jayaraman's answer, I think there are many ways you could engage. One particular point I wanted to make is of citizen science, what you correctly mentioned. You have to need to have a critical mind to question those things. That's important, to get some right answers, and particularly contextualize things. As he rightly said, many of the studies which are out are the global scale. We need to see how does it apply to our own context. Awareness raising is one thing. It's a simple thing. It's nothing, no rocket science in this. Advocacy is another thing. And again, that has also become such a fashion today. Greta Thunberg and all these models are there. There's so many. You should also understand they're coached in such a way to speak. That factor is completely people don't understand that aspect of it. So technology development, as I mentioned in my talk as well, there are so much of innovation happening in the apps and other things. There are umpteen number of things which finally reaches the people is a different thing. But again, that's where you have to apply yourself. You should be observant about your own neighborhoods where you live. That's a good starting point. Like Kavi, in his own way, is shown his own place where he's residing, the problems. That's the typical researcher mind as well, to kind of apply those things to your own context. I think that's where it begins. So there are umpteen number of ways to kind of engage yourself. Thanks.
Can I just come back to this? I guess I don't answer the second part as it. I will bother you later probably. But on the first part, I just wanted to bring to a number of young faces here. So I want to take one example which probably could drive home the point. We have this, Dr. Nambi showed this scheme of the Government of India called LIFE, which is Lifestyles for Environment. Very catchy and a lot of emphasis, number of workshops are being organized. All that is being said in a AC environment and whatnot. Probably we need to rethink about, is that the right lifestyle, first of all? And equally important, for example, for the young crowd that is here, most of you use these online apps for Swiggy, Zomato, and so on. I am pained to see some of my young friends actually ordering things on what Zomato calls as legends. I don't know whether you are aware of what is called legends, which is basically you sit in this city, ask for, let's say, Golgappa from Calcutta. You get it by evening. Imagine the lifestyle that is involved there, right? So this is not consistency. Please be consistent. That's more than sufficient. Consistent in your approach. That is more than sufficient. You do wonders for the society where you live and for the world as a whole.
Thank you to the panelists. So my question sort of harks back to some of the discussions that happened about the economy, but specifically about the MSME sector. Now there's a lot of discussions these days about decarbonizing the MSME sector, but with the focus being on decarbonizing, and there are concerns, when one think about it, of how we should address the question of MSME sector. There is an argument to be made that MSME sector in some sense needs to be protected from decarbonizing or the effects of decarbonizing, because if history is any guide, the money is not forthcoming, the technology transfer is not forthcoming, by way of easing intellectual property laws, and we also have a goal of improving the technological efficiency and the economic competitiveness of our MSME sector. So in some sense, these seem to be contradictory to each other. So how should one see it? Should it not be a sector, or should it be a sector where decarbonizing is prioritized, or ways in which we can improve the economic competency and technological efficiency and innovation when finance and technology transfer of any sort is not expected to be forthcoming. So how do we go about it?
I think you answered yourself in some sense, but the second option is the right option. It automatically incorporates into it the decarbonization part. If you efficiently move, if your energy efficiency improves, automatically decarbonization happens. If your question is whether we should keep the decarbonization as the priority, yes, absolutely not. That's not the way to proceed forward. That is true with every sector. That's what I think we have been trying to emphasize in our limited way. Whether we succeeded in it or not, it's a separate point. But priority need not be decarbonization. Priority would be development in an appropriate manner with efficiency improvements and so on and so forth, all the paraphernalia that we are talking about. In the process, you also achieve decarbonization, great. And that's how probably we need to be going about. If the global forces are compelling us to keep that as the first agenda item, resist. That's the only way I would say.
Sorry. I think it is, the priority should be more of resilience than decarbonization, as you rightly mentioned, because how do they kind of bounce back after an event like 2015, what we witnessed here? That's far more important for MSME because they're starting at the low base. And this is, in the priority list, the decarbonization is the last thing. If you'd ask me, definitely that counts, the efficiency counts. But how do they manage risks is the biggest question. If they do, they have that kind of capacity to handle that. Can they come out? What's the time period they're going to bounce back? These are some of the important questions.
Hello. Good evening. Sorry. Good afternoon, sir. I have a question. I will be very quick with my question. So, we have a concept of eco-anxiety right now. So, with our youths right now, we have a situation that media can create distresses in people, and when disaster strikes, it creates trauma. So my question is that how to handle that eco-anxiety. See, the eco-anxiety is the extreme worry which people feel about climate change, and if the knowledge is not clearly provided, it can create harm personally. So how to minimize that in uncertainty of this type of chaos?
I think there are two issues which we should be careful to separate. One which is of course very immediately directly relevant to any country, and for developing countries also perhaps even more important. And one is risk communication. How do you communicate risk? And all these issues around social amplification of risk, the way media amplifies the risk. We saw a lot of it in the period of the pandemic, and the WhatsApp university, that whole social media adds a whole new dimension. Even officially, government, for instance, in, let me not name governments, but state governments were promoting ivermectin. And one after the other, if you watch this portal called Retraction Watch, where wrong papers are withdrawn, all the ivermectin papers are being withdrawn. So there is a whole thing about risk communication. And for, say, cyclone disaster relief, evacuating people in case of a storm surge, okay? This kind of issues are very important. So I think this should be studied carefully. We have a lot of experience in this, but this should continue. This eco-anxiety thing, and this, I am sorry to say, now I don't like this Western-Eastern divide, but this one is clearly a developed country phenomenon. See, it is the, we must, I am sympathetic to it. You have the desperation of young people whose governments are doing nothing. What can I do to help them? Your government is not doing. Greta Thunberg can sail in a boat. I mean, I have no, once in a while she would take some pot shot at developing countries. I don't particularly mind, but they are desperate. So There, I think the problem is very clearly not to think of the climate problem as an individual consumption personal problem, but to think of it as a political structural problem. They refuse to politically mobilize on climate and they pay the price. What can we do about it? In our countries, luckily, for better or worse, we don't have that kind of sharp divides across the political spectrum on climate policy. If anything, there is unseemly agreement when there's a little more difference would be this thing. But now every chief minister wants to be net zero. And now the competition will be net zero earlier. So we don't have that kind of problem. So that eco-anxiety thing is a developed country problem, I'm sorry to say. So I think one should be a little more careful about where this language, and if you're a student working on this kind of thing, please go back and what they say, deconstruct where this, and look at the genealogy, if you wish, of the where this language comes from. So,
first of all, we should understand what he means by
solar? So maybe we'll discuss this
Hi, thank you for the insightful discussion. My name is Geeta. I'm a journalist with The Hindu. My question is to Jayaraman sir. Sir, in your opinion, is Tamil Nadu at the right juncture to focus on things like organic policy or switching to EV or renewable energy? EV, electric vehicles. So I'm asking because there were a bunch of policies that have been released in the last a month or so. The state is known to be one among the top states that fare well in development indices. But despite that, is the state at the right, well placed to focus on things like this?
Now all our generalities have come home to roost in a specific question. First of all, I would like to point out that promoting organic farming is not a necessary condition to promoting climate resilience in agriculture. Organic farming is a separate thing. It deals with the role of inputs, etc. Some of these inputs and their use have climate consequences, but this is not true of all of them. So organic, some people do conflate them, but scientifically speaking, they are two different questions with some overlap on some issues. Okay, number one. Number two, what is should be the underpinning of agriculture policy in the state of Tamil Nadu at this time? I think we need to go back to focus on productivity. I am sure productivity is part of the package, but it has to be brought out more clearly. Dr. Nambi is more directly associated with it, but he can comment. But I am personally, I think that the scale at which climate information transfer to farmers is taking place is very unambitious. I think Tamil Nadu can do much better by leveraging all India programs like the Fasal program and upscaling it in a massive way. Many agencies, including us at MSSRF, Dr. Nambi, others, several have ideas on how to do it. I think upscaling our effort on a massive scale for early morning systems for farmers, agromet advisories would be a valuable way to go. And currently, I think we would look for greater focus. There are a lot of good intentions in the agriculture sector, but personally, if you ask me, I would look for greater focus. On electric vehicles, etc., yes, as one of the states, there is an all India policy, there's a drive for electric vehicles. So electric vehicles, yes, certainly by all means. But one must be careful that the subsidy component that is offered for promotion of electric vehicles is in balance. I'm not an expert on the numbers, so I won't comment on specific numbers. But the important thing is to ensure that there is balance. Okay, so where exactly that lies is a matter for exact numbers, which, as I said, I haven't looked at. My overall feeling, however, is that whether it is intentional or otherwise, the Tamil Nadu thrust on climate in the missions comes across as too mitigation centric and too, shall we say, open to the benefit, assuming the beneficial impact of market forces. Okay, so I think the need for public investment, public finance must be more clearly underlined in the policy. Again, it's a matter of specifics how it will be done. And I do think that the developmental adaptation focus must come across much more strongly in the messaging. I personally think that it does not in the way I have seen it. This is my personal opinion, and others may have other opinions. Thank you.
Sir, one last question.
Sir, I'm from TEPS, Indian Public School. I'm studying 11th grade and I have done some research, sir. And I have found out, as you said in the one of the IIT students' question, he has said you should not compare India to any other economy, right? So in India, there are some structural problems and some other mismanagements, but how can we improve on these? And if we fix these, can we fix major problems like climate change and other issues? So with this, can we implement a change of government or any other or policies that we can do to improve this particular point?
Thank you. Kavi, you want to go?
I'm being asked to, thank you for the nice question. I think, we need to kind of we cannot simply look inward all the time to solve the problem. We may have to look at others to understand how to see, which has been, I think, highlighted by most of us also. We are not against looking at others, but blind mimicking is something we have resisted about. And I think that's the point probably we tried to convey, whether it is China's case or South Korea example or any other examples. That might be suitable for them, but may not be applicable entirely for us. Whatever is the best practices there, we can try to examine that to the best of our ability and try and implement it, whether it comes to mitigation side or on the adaptation side. We seem to be more emphasizing, as again highlighted by most of us, a lot more emphasis is being given to the mitigation side because of the global forces. Again, probably global intent is on those directions, but our priority should be more on the adaptation side, and that needs to be understood by appropriately looking at reasonably comparable countries and their practices, best practices. For instance, simply like municipal solid waste, if I take an example of that, we are struggling to resolve this problem, not in the climate change context, but in general. We are not yet been resolving it because there is a lot of behavioral change that is needed. People have to understand that waste needs segregation, waste needs minimization, and as a result, we simply think that out of my sight, out of the the problem is disappearing. That's not true, because it's a lot of waste is generated in a city like Chennai. Almost daily basis, 6,000 metric tons of waste gets generated, and it's a huge problem to deal with. And you need market incentives to address problems like this. For instance, South Korea has this mechanism of distributing the garbage bags through the municipal authority. If you have to dispose your garbage, you have to purchase from the municipal authority. So automatically and different bag sizes have different rates attached to them. These rates are not simply the bag rate. It also incorporates into it the rate of disposal, eventual burning or whatever, incineration, or whatever may be the routes that they have to follow. All that is inbuilt into the bag cost. And that's not a bad idea per se. And as a result, each individual, when they have to purchase those bags, will have to incorporate the conservation strategy, because the bigger the bag that you need to purchase, the costlier it will become. So, and these are the examples that we can borrow from other countries, but we're not against that. But all that we are saying is that blindly mimicking somebody may be questionable. I hope I'm making sense.
Thank you. There may be several questions from the audience as well, but since we are running short of time, I would request all of you to discuss with the concerned panelists during lunch time, and we have to close now. Before closing, I would like to request Professor Krishnamurthy, if you want to say a few words, because you did not speak during the floor discussion. Just 1 minute.
Okay, there are no questions, direct questions to me, but there are certain interesting learning outcomes for us when we are doing the recovery mapping in Chennai and resilience studies. One thing is, whatever the research we do, we have to involve the concerned end user agency in our program. That is the most important thing, what we learn during our collaboration directly with the Chennai Corporation, training the zonal officials how to use the resilience data, index data. And another thing is looking into this recovery mapping. One interesting observation we have seen is in the field is the community themselves come out with various adaptation strategies. And visiting some of the sites in the worst affected areas in Velachery and around that place, and the lifting of houses is taking place. This is being considered as one of the adaptation method. The community themselves got the technology from somewhere other part of the country, and we have seen many houses that was flooded during the 2015 flood. The people started lifting, and this is being found as a very wonderful adaptation method by the community themselves. And likewise, the climate change is going to happen, and then invariably, maybe every alternate years, we are going to have this kind of flooding situation in the city. Maybe we have stormwater drain and so many other developments will take place. But those mitigation measures alone is not going to be helpful to the community, and community have to themselves come forward this kind of adaptation measure. And how this financial mechanism, I am purely a geology person, but I am not related to this exactly on this economic domain. But how the financial mechanism available to the community to do this kind of adaptive measures. So these are all the very challenging areas we have to explore, and then that may be the helpful to the community instead of going for a bank loan, whether the bank is helpful to the community to do this kind of lifting of houses and other adaptive measures. So these are all the things we have to explore. And 15 flooding in Chennai is a very good learning experience. What we learned from 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, the same way, 15 flood also given a lot of experiences and lessons to us. And then how to move forward, how the community is getting not only the enhancing the resilience, but as well as to coming with this kind of adaptive measures. These are all the things going to helpful to the community in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So we will close the panel discussion now. So I would like to thank all the panelists for the excellent discussion we had. Thank you so much. Now the vote of thanks. Yeah.
We have displayed some books related to environment and climate change in our library. Like probably after lunch, I request everyone to walk to the library to just see the books. Now I request Dr. Shromana Ganguly, Assistant Advisor, RBI, to come deliver the vote of thanks.
Respected Professor Venkatachalam, esteemed panelists present here today, respected Chief General Manager, Madam Uma Shankar, all other guests as well as students from MIDS, and faculty members, very good afternoon to all of you. Combating climate change and climate finance both are the part of flagship priority of G20. Under its G20 presidency, India has given special importance to both these areas as the country prepares itself for transition to low carbon development pathway in line with the Paris Agreement. Under G20, the Sustainable Finance Working Group is specifically focusing on mobilization of climate finance, which is, again, as some of the panelists explained, is a very important topic, especially from the viewpoint of developing economies. Sustainable finance is also included in the main work stream of finance track of G20, which involves the RBI. In this connection, RBI, along with the Ministry of Finance, is organizing various events, focused discussions and deliberations to spread awareness about these issues and also to take G20 to the people of India across all strata of the society. Today's event was part of such initiative. Key takeaway from today's session highlights some of the very important points. As we have learned, India's climate adaptation strategy should always be aligned with its overall developmental objective and goal. We cannot overlook our developmental priorities and just focus on climate adaptation strategies. That would be a wrong move from our part. Despite being a minimal contributor in the global carbon footprint, indeed the very theme of G20, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future, symbolizes a mass movement involving community action as well as individual effort to protect and preserve the environment. However, here, the role of developed economies become very important because they are developed today using the environment. They have used the environment to reach where they are today. So here comes the question of global equity, and we should not overlook that as well. As the Jan Bhagidari event, jointly organized by RBI and MIDS, come to its closure, I take this opportunity to express the vote of thanks. On behalf of RBI, I express my sincere gratitude to Professor Venkatachalam, who has been our key contact point from MIDS, and without his continuous support and coordination, conducting today's event was not possible. We also thank Professor Venkatachalapati from MIDS for enthusiastically agreeing to host today's event at MIDS. We are grateful to all the 4 distinguished panelists present today here, Professor Jayaraman, Professor Krishnamurthy, Professor Kavi, Kumar, and Professor Nambi, for agreeing to join us in today's panel discussion. Indeed, it has been very enriching and thought-provoking. Sincere thanks to our Regional Director, Sri S.N.M. Swami Sir, and CGM Madam for providing encouragement and support to conduct the Jan Bhagidari events and taking out time from their busy schedule to be here today with us. We thank MIDS Chairperson Sri Gopalaswamy for his presence as well as for delivering the welcome address. From MIDS, Sri Narasimham, Admin Officer, Mr. Prasanna and Mr. Karthik has provided significant assistance in terms of various logistic arrangements. I would also like to take the names of Mr. Lakshmanan, Mr. Sampath, Mr. Manivanan, Dr. Shanmugam, Mr. Varun, and Mr. Srivastan from the MIDS team who all provided their assistance and which has helped us to conduct today's event in a smooth manner. My sincere thanks to all of them. From RBI Human Resource Management team, Personal Officer Shri Vinay Rajiv, along with other team members, Shri Abraham, Shri Anand, Shri Balaji, and Shri Vukesh has provided support in terms of liaison and other logistics. Thanks to all of them. And lastly, I would like to thank each and everybody present here as audience to take out your time to come here and make this event a success. Thanks all. As a token of gratitude, we would like to present small gifts to our esteemed panelists. I would request Madam Uma Shankar to do that.